They are Crocodile the Sand Crocodile, and Edward Wable, known as White 2. As soon as Mr. 3 said this, the audience was stunned and fell into silence. Even Hancock, who knew Mr. 3's next recruit in advance, couldn't help but stunned. This damn liar, isn't it only Crocodile who said on the deck of the merchant ship, why is there a brutal buy 2 now? Recruiting 2 new and old Qiwuhai at the same time, did he not wake up, or did he really think his little life was too long? Hey, 3, are you sure you're not joking? Same, recruit 2 at the same time, are 2 that are so difficult. After the shock, Bucky, the captain, was the first to speak, and asked everyone's doubts. If I remember correctly, Crocodile is still your original boss, right? Besides, although Bai Ershi is powerful, there are young Bai Ershi. The level of the beard, but. At the mention of Edward Wable, Bucky's Joker had a hint of apprehension on his face. This guy who suddenly appeared and claimed to be the biological son of Whitebeard didn't look like a person who paid attention to benevolence and morality. Its client, Miss Ba Jhin, is a cunning person. If you contact them, you will be bitten back if you are not careful. Bucky's words caused everyone at the conference table to nod in agreement. Whether it is Za Po of the 9 Snake Pirates or Arita and others, in their guesses, these 2 people are not the best choice. Compared with them, Luo, who was born in a supernova, and Hawkeye, who pays attention to morality, are better choices. Although the difficulty is also not small, even if the negotiation with them breaks down, it is not easy to provoke unprovoked attacks from the other party. At least there is some basic protection for Zhao Ming. However, such an idea falls into the eyes of Mr. 3, who has a big picture of the One Piece world. Luo naturally, who is now in the decisive battle with Kaido's mother on Onishima, needless to say, the difficulty factor is bloody. As the world's largest swordsman, Hawkeye has always liked to be alone, and he has no weaknesses like Hancock once became a slave of the Tianlong people. He is an almost perfect and mysterious man. To recruit such a lone ranger, considering the current conditions, it is as difficult as heaven. As for the possibility of an alliance with Hawkeye, for the time being, it is not within the scope of Mr. 3's consideration for recruiting Shicibukai to become stronger. In this way, there are not many Qiwuhai left. Jinbei, who joined the Straw Hats and was also in the Onishima War, Moria, who broke into the Blackbeard territory to find his subordinates, and Big Bear, who was transformed into a plaything of the dragons, these 3 are not to be thought of for the time being. Of course, Mr. 3 couldn't tell these people about the original work, and he couldn't explain it if he really wanted to. So, in the face of everyone's puzzled eyes, he looked up at Bucky, the corners of his mouth raised slightly, and said to himself, because Crocodile is my former immediate boss, I know him quite well, so the possibility of successful recruitment is possible. Not too low. As for Shicibukai, judging from the information published in the previous newspapers, this simple-minded guy is obedient to Miss Ba Jhin by his side. And Miss Ba Jhin, like you, is a bad guy who regards money as his life and has no lower limit for money, so. Light flashed in Mr. 3's eyes. As long as there are enough attractive interests, there should be no big problem for her to agree to buy Ershi to join us. Wait. Gal Dino, who the hell did you say is a villain who has no limit for money? Bucky immediately heard the smell of pointing at Sang and scolding why. He patted the table and shouted out, of course, pirates. Didn't they choose to sail for money? Treasure maps and treasures are the romance of men, you know the shit. Ah bastard. Mr. 3 waved his hand irrefutably. Bucky is right, think about it carefully, it seems that in the whole pirate world, this guy is keen to collect treasure maps and hunt for treasures. Other pirates either take risks or want to be the strongest in the world, and they are some heinous desperados. On the opposite side, Hancock skipped Bucky's unnutritious remarks and asked Mr. 3, Mr. 3, since you are so confident in recruiting Crocodile, you won't say much about your concubine. But Wable is like a ticking time bomb. Guy, can it really make a difference to our team? Mr. 3 heard what she meant. Under the control of Miss Ba Jhin, whose interests are paramount, Bai 2, who joined the Baji pirates, will become the biggest hidden danger. If you are not careful, you will be bitten back, which is not worth the loss. In fact, he did not include Bai 2 in the recruitment plan in the first place. But after a difficult battle with Vice Admiral Steers of the Navy headquarters, he was deeply aware of his own lack of strength and eagerly wanted to become stronger in order to cope with the turbulent era of chaos that followed. After all, when it comes to that far beyond the anime plot, the overall situation as a traveler will be useless. The only thing that can save lives is only strength, strong enough to compete with the strength of the generals in the four emperors. Therefore, recruiting Bai or Shi is considered a dangerous move with practical value. If it is successful, it will be twice the result with half the effort, and the system goals can be completed in the shortest time, and the greatest improvement in strength can be obtained. By that time, even if Weibo really has 2 hearts, he will be able to killed on the spot. Weibo is indeed a time bomb, and it poses a great threat to the subsequent security and stability of the Bucky pirates, but think about it in reverse, isn't this a big weapon that can blow up the enemy half to death? Mr. 3 paused and looked at Hancock and Bucky with an inexplicable smile on his lips. Or do you have no control over Weibo's confidence and think his strength and IQ are higher than yours? An understatement struck the proud Bucky and Hancock like a bolt from the blue. Bastard Mr. 3, I can't pretend I didn't hear what you said. Bucky floated up. The ability to split the fruit was activated, and the big red robe on his body was stretched huge. This uncle is Bucky the Clown. Weibo is a fart. Hancock's face was also gloomy, with arrogance and anger flowing in the depths of his beautiful eyes, and said coldly, Mr. 3, do you know the consequences of underestimating your concubine? Granny Zaw, who was sitting next to Hancock, stared at Mr. 3 with a serious expression, with fine sweat oozing from her forehead, and was secretly shocked. This man, in such a short period of time, found out the character and temper of Shiji. However, due to Mr. 3's special status as a slave of the Tianlong people, and also agreeing with his proposal, the mother did not stop it. Mr. 3, who successfully aroused the fighting spirit of the two, smiled and hid his merits and fame. Since both of you are all right, that's the decision. After that, he looked up at Bucky. Bucky, negotiate with Miss Bajan and recruit Weibo, it's up to you. Bucky, whose self-esteem was in a state of bursting, nodded heavily. No problem, leave this kind of small matter to. Halfway through the sentence, Bucky suddenly realized something was wrong, and pointed at himself. The relaxed calm on his face instantly collapsed. Me. Let me recruit Weibo. At the same time, the recruitment of 2 Qiwuhai is a decision made by Mr. 3 after careful consideration. After all, the time is really tight at the moment, but those wily admirals should not be underestimated. Once they realize that the purpose of the Bucky pirates is to gather all the old and new Qiwuhai, then the difficulty factor of wanting to contact the Qiwuhai in the future will be too great. After all, according to the initial layout of the Navy, the Qiwuhai is the most special existence. It is the third force that can form a check, balance and confrontation with the Navy headquarters and the 4 emperors. Gathering these fierce and powerful guys together will develop into a nightmarish group like the legendary pirates, the Rocks Pirates. Even the threat to the Navy headquarters will be far greater than the Rocks Pirates. Because each of the forces and connections of the Qiwuhai hidden in the dark are quite terrifying, almost running through the black and white of the entire New World. Therefore, before being noticed by the Navy headquarters, Mr. 3 needs to recruit more Shicibukai as soon as possible. It's too late to change. Taking a step back, it is useless to simply leave a Bucky to guard in Kalai Bali. It is better to make the best use of it. Yes, Bucky, the recruitment of Weibo can only be done by you. Mr. 3 answered Bucky's doubts with certainty. So, what about Hancock? Bucky looked at Hancock with a calm face not far away. In his slightly flustered eyes, he saw that the alluring and flawless face, known as the most beautiful in the world, was writing, thighs, safety, stable, amulet, and other words. Mr. 3 seemed to see Bucky's thoughts, and said of course, I will go with me to find Crocodile. With a strong man like Hancock by my side, I can feel at ease, so as not to be suddenly blown up by the sand. The crocodile was killed on the spot. Recruiting a hero as rebellious as Crocodile is a pretty tough job in itself. Not to mention that the former Mr. 3 was still working under Crocodile, and he almost twisted his neck. With this trade-off, the difficulty of successfully convincing Crocodile to join the Bucky Pirates has undoubtedly increased several levels. Although Mr. 3 already has a corresponding plan in mind, he cannot guarantee 100% success. And this is still under the protection of Hancock. Hearing this, Bucky, who had no bottom at all, suddenly fell into a state of rampage. His eyes glared fiercely, and his teeth became jagged. Bastard. Then I don't need to guarantee my safety, right? That's Whitebeard's biological son, the brutal and violent monster Weibo. Mr. 3 knew his reaction like the back of his hand. He reached out in advance and pushed his drooling head away, and said firmly, "That's why you need to come out in person. This kind of extremely difficult thing, no matter who goes, can only end in failure. Only you, Captain Bucky, and only you, the strongest and most intelligent in our group, can do it." A rainbow fart was blown down, and the panic on Bucky's face gradually dissipated, replaced by a full of arrogance and ecstasy. "Aha, ahaha, damn it. 3, I didn't expect you to trust me so much. Since this is the case, then the captain will not pretend, in serious mode, the mere Xiaobai and Lao Jin are not something that's at your fingertips?" Bucky laughed and patted his chest confidently. "Captain Wise." Mr. 3 once again made up for a wave of rainbow farts. Asking Bucky to go to Weibo wasn't a helpless move under the urgency of time. Quite the contrary, he was simply the perfect candidate to recruit Weibo. The reason is very simple. First, Bucky and Miss Beijing, who controls Weibo, are the same kind of people, insidious and cunning, and attach great importance to money and treasure. By letting them negotiate, it is easy to find a balance that is acceptable to both parties. Second, the torn-apart fruit of Baji himself has a natural restraint on Weibo, who uses the Daguan knife. Even if the talks between the two sides collapsed, Bucky would still have the strength to fight, and he could even win Miss Beijing directly over Weibo. Instead, let him go to Crocodile. In case the old man is unhappy, and the desert sword starts, Bucky must lie down. Third, it is a bit more metaphysical. This guy Bucky has his own luck and domineering, so let him recruit Weibo. Maybe there will be unexpected surprises and gains. After all, the lucky color of this product cannot even be avoided by the system. Hancock and Granny Zaw, who were sitting opposite, looked at Bucky, who was laughing, and then at Mr. 3, who was calm and calm. Finally, they looked at each other again, and they could see the full of doubts and gaps in each other's eyes. This clown Bucky. Why does it look different from the rumored, a little unexpected, pure? As we all know, Bucky has a special two-color domineering, lucky color domineering and brain complementary color domineering. The lucky color is only useful to his companions, and the brain complementary color is only useful to the enemy and unknown passersby. Therefore, it is normal for Hancock and his mother-in-law to have this illusion, and it will naturally disappear after a long time, just like the current Alrita. Forgive my remark, Mr. 3, if it's really according to what you said, who should guard the base camp of the Bucky pirates under your feet? Putting aside the superfluous thoughts for the time being, the mother-in-law spoke slowly, and the location in the words pointed out the biggest hidden danger of Mr. 3's arrangement. Without Mr. 3, Bucky and Hancock, Kalai Bali will be in a state of extreme emptiness, and it may be captured by the Navy at any time. Of course it's all of you except the three of us. Mr. 3 stood up and called out one by one. In addition to the old and fading mother-in-law, the 4 Arita and the 2 Snake Sisters are all listed. We are not the Admiral's opponent. Arita sighed in surprise. Mochi and others agreed. We'll do our best. But the Snake Men sisters were surging with fighting spirit. Their faces were full of fearlessness, and they were obviously determined to defend this place to the death. Don't be so nervous. Mr. 3 said calmly, as I said before, we let Styles and the elite sailors go, and didn't offend the Navy headquarters to death. Based on the current situation, there is a high probability that they will not be with us, who have 2 Qiwuhai combat power, to die. Sabo and the army grow up in the Holy Land Mary Joa, and the 5 supernovas of the Ghost Island fight against Kaido's mother in the alliance of the 4 emperors. These 2 shocking events are enough for the Navy headquarters to be overwhelmed. Mr. 3 thought so in his heart. This was a matter of course for him who had planned for a long time, but in the eyes of others, it was a completely different perception. Arita's pupils shrank, and she muttered, so that's the case. I didn't understand when you said you were going to let Stellas go. It turns out that you have already considered this step. Mochi and the others shook their heads and sighed. Although Hancock and Zappa were also surprised, they were only limited to this and were not too shocked. After all, they had seen it with their own eyes. How did Mr. 3 play the new Marine Rear Admiral Kirby so much? After pondering for a few seconds, Zappo couldn't help but ask. Mr. 3, when Amazon Lily used the fragrance snake as a cover and successfully evacuated the residence, you once said that this strategy was called Mingxiu's Plank Road to cross Chengqing in the dark, so now this. Mr. 3 didn't think about it, and answered without hesitation. Just in case, and in order to stabilize the military's morale, I will leave the wax statues of Bucky and Hancock on the hull later to deter the Navy and some daring pirates. Use a false appearance to confuse the enemy, so as to achieve the magic effect of deterring the enemy, and defending the empty city camp with very few troops, so this trick is called Empty City Plan. Empty City Plan. Everyone at the conference table blinked and pondered the word Mr. 3, a word they had never heard of before. That's right, there are as many as 36 similar strategies in my hometown, and I just learned a little bit of the basics. It's so ingenious that it's hard to describe in words. Mr. 3's face was filled with undisguised pride. This is the crystallization of the war wisdom that the Dazonghua family has accumulated for thousands of years. Before crossing the road, he felt like that, but when he came to the chaotic world of pirates and perfectly played with the naval fleet headed by Kebi, he was deeply impressed. Feel the psychological game contained in it. What level of terror is there? If the overall situation of the pirate world is the foundation of his invincibility, and the strongest emperor subsystem is his super plugin that quickly becomes stronger, then these great wisdoms of the ancients, which can be called dimensionality reduction blows, are the later era of chaos, the winning magic weapon. With all three shaking hands, how do you lose this kind of TNU opening? Damn it, isn't it? 3. I've never heard of you before, and there are such awesome things? Bucky rubbed his palms, looking at Mr. 3 with eager eyes. In the past, we were still privileged Qiwuhai, and we didn't need to use these war-related strategies. Mr. 3 saw the heat in Bucky's eyes, shook his head, and said, "Don't think about Bucky, you won't learn it." Damn it. You're a weak soul. Bucky, who was seen through his mind, sat back in his seat with little interest. Hancock, Zappo, Arita and the others, who pricked up their ears and wanted to eavesdrop, also retracted their heads dimly. After recruiting enough Shicibukai to survive the current period of urgent need for obscene development, I will discuss with you, Captain, and everyone in detail about the 36 strategies. After all, Bucky is the nominal captain of the Bucky Pirates, and Mr. 3 gave Bucky face just right. Ahahaha, to be honest, I wasn't interested at all at first, but for the sake of you being so caring, my uncle will be merciful and listen to it. Bucky grunted in response. The eyes of the rest of the crowd were also burning, and they were obviously looking forward to the 36 tricks, which sounded so grand. After chatting, Mr. 3 looked up at Bucky in the main seat. The relaxed expression on his face became solemn and serious, and said solemnly, "Then, if there is no problem with the next plan, Captain, order it." The sudden formality caught Bucky a little off guard. After pondering for a few seconds to calm down, he immediately activated his ability, using his torn body to open the Da Hong Pao, the corners of his mouth raised, setting off a wild and wanton arc. Good. Brothers. Under the gradually excited gazes of all the cadres in the audience, Bucky's body rose to the sky and shouted loudly, "The meeting is over, all cheer me up, carry out my tasks to the end, and work hard to the best of my ability. Let's go." Oh. Half an hour later, on the back of Kalai Bali, on the more secluded coast. Mr. 3 and Bucky stood side by side, looking at the small sailboat slowly approaching the sea in the distance. Bucky, be careful with Bai 2 this time. If there is really no chance, giving up is also a good choice. Putting on a cool casual suit, Mr. 3 gave a final warning to Bucky with deep eyes. Seeing that Mr. 3 is so serious, Bucky also changed his usual funny style and reached out and patted him on the shoulder. 3 we have been born and died so many times, don't you know me well enough? Don't worry, it's really dangerous, my mother can run faster than anyone else. Mr. 3 looked up at Bucky and said, I mean, if there is really no chance, give up your ambition to stay with Miss Bajan and replace Wable. It might not be a feasible solution. Bucky. Damn it. Why did I have the illusion that Mr. 3 was pretty good at a certain moment just now? Okay, Mr. 3. I will accept your admiration, and I will definitely help you convey it to the old woman Miss Jhin. Don't worry, brother, I will introduce your advantages well. Bucky smiled wickedly. To counterattack. Mr. 3 shrugged and said helplessly. Before that, she might be obsessed with your sexy nose at the moment of meeting, and I probably won't have a chance. Hearing this, Bucky's smirk froze at the corner of his mouth, and he stared at Mr. 3 with a displeased face. You bastard, who are you talking about with a red nose? It's a sexy nose. Mr. 3 corrected solemnly. Damn it. I think you want to continue the unfinished work on the balcony before you leave, right? Soft-lying Candleman. I can't pretend I didn't hear that. Bucky the red nose. You have a red nose, and your whole family has red noses. The hairstyle on Mr. 3's head was flaming, and Bucky's hands and feet were also torn apart. You guys, what are you doing, playing a monkey show? In the icy cold, a glamorous voice full of royal energy came from behind, interrupting the confrontation between the two. Mr. 3 put away his ability and looked back. A tall and beautiful figure walked slowly under the bright sunshine. I saw Hancock took off the cloak behind him and put on a light and sexy lilac 9-snake cheongsam. Different from her usual image, she was wearing a rare white peaked cap on her head at this time. Although her long black hair was still scattered and fluttering, she exuded the atmosphere of a royal sister under the bright and neat peaked cap. Every time the slender and flawless long legs take a step in the waist twists, it drives the pair of snake-shaped earrings under the ears to tinkle, which makes people unable to help but stay in the cold and perfect. On the side of the face. Mr. 3 and Bucky, who are both lechers with similar smells, were a little fascinated for a while, and they completely forgot about throwing their fists in each other's faces. Cough. Hancock, are you here? In the end, Mr. 3, who was more determined, regained his senses first, and greeted Hancock with a smile. Don't get me wrong, we are doing warm-up exercises before parting. Come on. He raised his hand and nudged Bucky. Bucky immediately understood, and the fist that had reached Mr. 3's face suddenly loosened, and hooked Mr. 3's shoulders. Aha, that's right. I said there's no need for warm-up exercises or anything. 3 This guy has to pull me here, there's really no way to get him. Mr. 3 also stretched out his hand and hooked Bucky's shoulder. After glancing at Hancock, he praised without hesitation. By the way, Hancock, your dress is too beautiful, isn't it? 36 beauty tricks, are you interested in considering it? Anyway, when he was in 9 Snake City, he had shown that he was a womanizer, which would be more honest. On the other hand, Bucky, who was next to him, was stunned for a moment, and frantically twisted his body trying to distance himself from Mr. 3. To be so outspoken in front of the Pirate Queen Hancock, this is no longer simply too long, and his brain is flooded. Hancock raised his icy eyes and looked at Bucky and Mr. 3, who were hooked on their shoulders. The intuition in his heart that he accidentally got on the pirate ship became stronger and stronger. It is not so much that these two were the first and second leaders of the pirate group, they are more like funny characters performing acrobatics on the side of the road. Are they really the kind of men full of great ambitions and ambitions? Hancock didn't say a word, and looked at Mr. 3 and Bucky carefully. At some point, for some unknown reason, an inexplicable light surged out of my heart and circulated throughout my body. To be honest, she didn't like that kind of serious, depressing pirate group. Although it would make people feel a little more reliable, it was very likely that they would be stabbed in the back when they were in danger. After all, this is the era of chaotic and cruel great pirates. At this time, Mr. 3 and Bucky, who had no image, looked unreliable, but they felt reassuring for no reason. Maybe this is the real partner, right? Thinking of this, the coldness on Hancock's pretty face gradually dissipated, turning into a charming smile that was enough to fascinate all beings. If what you mean by the beauty plan and the concubine understand the same thing, then success is inevitable, because... She put her hands on her hips, raised her head and raised her chest, allowing her beautiful face to be exposed to the sun, and did not make the iconic stooping gesture of contempt. Concubine, it's so beautiful. From this moment on, she is really determined to regard Bucky and Mr. 3 as companions. On the sunny sky, the peculiarly shaped seagulls fluttered their wings and galloped down, skipping the shimmering sea level, and plunged into the sea. Tweet. When the seagull drilled out of the sea and fluttered high again, it was already holding a frantically struggling seafish in its mouth. The weight of the fat seafish obviously exceeded the calculation of the seagull. Even if it flapped its wings desperately, it could not resist the tendency of its body to fall slowly. It is greedy and unwilling to let go of its mouth. It would rather die than bite the fat seafish and speed up the flapping of its wings. Unfortunately, it is useless for eggs. There is no suspense, the only hapless seagull fell back to the sea level. But at the same time, it did not sink into the deep sea, and was very lucky to crash land on a pure white land. Thank God for the gift. The seagull stood on the white land just like this. The bird's eyes were dripping, and its eyes looked reverently into the distance. I saw this piece of white land that appeared inexplicably on the sea level, floating like a white snake, and it was difficult to see the end at a glance. If this seagull can be smarter, he can judge that the white continent under his feet is not a gift from the gods, but candle. At this point, the end of the white candle channel. Mr. 3 is sitting on the sea bike, stepping on the pedals with both feet, and heading towards the destination island under the guidance of the permanent pointer on the front of the bike. Since the end of the war on the top, Crocodile has brought Mr. 1 back into the new world where the strong are like forests, lurking in a certain area to develop forces secretly, and there is a big comeback. Although he has been quite low-key in the past 2 years, he has not made any big news that shocked the world, and his whereabouts are always uncertain, and there is no fixed territory or camp. Ordinary pirates and even the headquarters of the Navy want to pinpoint his position is not a small thing, but sitting on the Baki Express, one of the most powerful mercenary groups in the New World, the Bucky pirates have amazing intelligence capabilities, especially all kinds of gossip. Therefore, after Mr. 3 issued an instruction to find Crocodile from internal channels, there was soon relevant news. Crocodile at this time was lurking on a relatively remote and deserted island. So, he started to act non-stop. As for why not to take the faster and more convenient pirate ship, the reason is very simple. Mr. 3 wants to use the sea bike to double the effect of strengthening the exercise effect, and improve his strength as much as possible before meeting Crocodile. Whether it is his own physical quality, fruit ability, or three-color domineering. From the dripping sweat and slight panting on Mr. 3's face at this time, it is not difficult to see that this kind of long-term high-intensity marine sports is quite tiring. Just riding a bicycle is actually not very strenuous. The most fundamental reason is the dragging behind the bicycle, the gorgeous convertible carriage. Speaking of which, Mr. 3, what exactly did you write in the so-called tips you gave to Captain Bucky when you parted? Hancock crossed his legs and sat in the open car with his legs crossed. The white peaked cap he wore on his head was well protected from the sun. She stretched out her flawless white palm, casually picked up the special black tea with ice cubes in her hand, put it to her mouth and took a sip before putting it down again. That gesture, Your Majesty the Queen, and Mr. 3, who is pedaling hard in front of the bicycle, is like a humble cart driver. There is no way. This is the biggest concession for Hancock, who intends to travel by boat. Originally, Mr. 3 wanted to add a rear seat to the back of the bike, but unsurprisingly aroused the contempt and disgust on Hancock's face. In desperation, I had to settle for the next best thing, and specially created such a gorgeous carriage inlaid with gold and silver. Don't look at this as just a carriage for one person, but it is difficult to calculate the candle passage of Mr. 3. Release an appropriate amount of lubricating liquid candle between the candle and the carriage to reduce friction, and release the sight and color to perceive the crisis under the sea, etc. It's all growing exponentially. A clever trick? Actually, it's just a small item, and there are some well-intentioned cheers. Mr. 3 held the front of the bicycle with one hand, grabbed the towel hanging around his neck with the other hand, and wiped the sweat from his forehead. It looks more like a driver. Goodwill cheers. Hancock frowned slightly, having considerable doubts about the preceding modifiers. Just as she was about to ask for the details, deep in the dark blue pupils, a flash of red light, which represented the activation of knowledge, suddenly flashed. What is there under the sea? Immediately after that, Mr. 3, who also sensed, suddenly stopped the cycling action, and the wax fruit ability was activated to brake suddenly by generating candles on the bicycle wheel. Whoa whoa whoa. I saw a huge water bag suddenly swelled from the calm sea level ahead, pulling the surrounding seawater to swirl and surging wildly. Mr. 3's pupils shrank suddenly, and he stepped on the candle passage that was about to be smashed by the waves. The overwhelming solid candles were formed out of thin air and spread in all directions, successfully resisting the impact of the waves with firm stability and good floatability. Mr. 3 stood on the candle continent, with a serious expression, and his wide eyes were full of shock. The oppressive giant shadows spread little by little, covering the bright sun rays, completely shrouding him and Hancock's tiny figures. I saw the huge blisters bulging in front suddenly bursting, slowly revealing the scene inside. It was a small red and white mountain with a height of 20 meters. No, that's not right. Mr. 3 looked closely, and on the left and right sides of the little mountain, There were two black pupils the size of the tabletop, very symmetrically. Whizzing. The jet black pupils swept away the flowing seawater, turned slightly with a greedy desire to prey, and landed on Mr. 3 and Hancock not far away. This is so special, it is actually a terrifyingly large body. Big goldfish. It looks like it's treating us to a delicious afternoon dessert. Hancock raised his eyes and glanced at the big goldfish exuding killing intent. Big goldfish, it's so scary. After a brief shock, Mr. 3 spread his hands, revealing a very exaggerated look of fear. Jingle bell. He rang the bell of the sea bike and asked politely, "Mr. Goldfish, you're blocking our way, can you let it go?" The eyes of the big goldfish on the opposite side were slightly focused, and he clearly sensed the contempt in the eyes of the two two-legged beasts in front of him. As the top predator in this sea area, when has it received such contempt? Roar. The offended big goldfish roared furiously, opened its huge bloody mouth like a hill, and bit down on Mr. 3 and Hancock, trying to devour these two humble two-legged beasts in one bite. However, a king's aura above all things suddenly erupted. In the perception of the big goldfish who launched the attack brazenly, this oppressive overlord is domineering, just like the most terrifying and domineering supermonster in the depths of the sea. It seems that it only takes a moment to tear its proud huge body and its weak soul to shreds. Gollum Gollum. Brother, eldest brother, and younger brother have eyes but don't know Mount Tai. Let's make way. Let's make way. I wish you a smooth journey and all the best. Before Mr. 3 could make a move, the big goldfish who had been aggressive a second ago, thumped, turned into a huge black shadow, and burrowed back to the bottom of the sea. In the blink of an eye, there is no trace. It's really a wasteful use of things. Hancock changed his sitting position and commented on Mr. 3's sudden arrogance. I think this is the quickest way to solve unnecessary trouble, Mr. 3 corrected. This kind of experience of staring at the giant sea monster and scaring the shit out of it, don't be too handsome or too pretentious. Unfortunately, this is the boundless sea, and it is impossible for passers-by who eat melons to exclaim. Mr. 3 secretly said in his heart that it was a pity, but in the next second, with the sound of a ding bell, on the sea level in the distance, his nerves were instantly tense, and the hairs all over his body stood up. At this time, it was obviously a scorching sun-like day, but the icy and biting cold wind was blowing head-on. Mr. 3, look ahead. That man is. Even Hancock, who had been drinking tea calmly throughout the whole process, threw off his teacup with a nervous expression and stood up abruptly from the open-top carriage. Ah, I thought it was an illusion. I didn't expect that in this vast sea, I could really meet a strong and domineering powerhouse. A leisurely and cheerful male voice came from the opposite side, and in the flows, a one-legged man riding a bicycle slowly stopped. I saw him raise his hand to tidy up the somewhat messy corners of his clothes, revealing the whole picture in the sun. That's right, this passenger who eats melons is the former Admiral Aokiji, the current Blackbeard crew, and the founder of Seabike. A natural frozen fruit person, Kuzan. At the same time that Mr. 3 and Hancock encountered Kuzan, a small pirate sailboat was driving on an unknown sea area in the New World. Flying on the mast of the sailboat is the flag of the clown Bucky Pirates. Little ones, how long will it take to get to the island where Wabel and Miss Bajan are located? Bucky, who was sitting in a high position, asked the little pirate who was kneeling halfway below. Because there is a certain degree of risk in recruiting by two this time, Bucky did not travel alone, but brought more than a dozen loyal and trustworthy men. Most of them are the first batch of ardent fans who have supported Bucky the Clown since the advance of the city prison, and they are also powerful masters with an average bounty of nearly $1 million. Go back to the captain, the destination island has been determined, and if there is no accident, you can arrive before sunset. The little pirate brother with exploding muscles replied admiringly. When he heard that the captain of his own family was going to contact Bai Tu, who is known as the son of Whitebeard, and had the intention of recruiting him, this fanatical fan could not restrain his excitement. As expected of Captain Bucky, in the face of a powerful super monster like Wabel, he has absolute confidence to conquer it. Understood. Go to rest first, and prepare for a big fight. Bucky waved his hand and said calmly. Yes. The muscle boy respectfully exited the room. After the younger brother walked away, Bucky put away the relaxed and casual expression on his face, and a faint fear of death appeared on his face covered in clown makeup. No matter how hype on the surface, but after all, the opponent is the sinister Miss Ba Jhin and the powerful Bai Tu, it is impossible to say that you are not nervous. Correct. Suddenly, Bucky's eyes lit up, and he took out a gray-white kit from the dark pocket of Dahongpao. Mr. 3 has a lot of tricks and a lot of weird ideas. The tricks he gives will definitely play a key role. Don't open it until the critical moment, pretending to be so mysterious, I have to see what's inside. Thinking of this, Bucky let out a weird laugh, raised his hand and untied the kit. Looking down, it was empty inside, except for a note with text written on it, there was nothing extra. With anticipation in his eyes, Bucky took out the note and spread it out in the palm of his hand. When he saw the content on it, the smile on the corner of his mouth suddenly froze. Depend on. Knowing that you will open in advance, my suggestion is, use your sexy red nose to seduce Miss Ba Jhin, my dear Captain Bucky. Damn Galtino, I'm going to fuck you. Bucky was torn apart on the spot and pinched the note. Just wanted to tear it to pieces, but inadvertently, I caught a glimpse of a small line of words printed on the back of the note. What kind of plane is this Mr. 3 doing? Fortunately, I opened it in advance to see it. Otherwise, when the so-called critical moment, who would pay attention to this small print? 1 second ago, he gritted his teeth in anger at Mr. 3's extremely arrogant ridicule, but the next second, Bucky, who discovered the secret behind the note, couldn't help but chuckled at his wit. So, let's take a look at the uncle, Mr. 3, what good idea he came up with. Bucky, who became expectant again, spread out the note and stared at the small print the size of an ant with wide eyes. Bucky, if the negotiation with Miss Bajin and Wabel really falls into a situation where nothing can be done, then, what are you expecting? The information came to an abrupt end, followed by a blank space. That's it, gone. Perhaps unwilling to accept this cruel reality, Bucky rummaged through the note, trying to find another place to write, but the result was still empty. Gal. Dino. Staying in place for about 10 seconds, Bucky broke out completely, tearing the note in his hand to shreds. He swore to wait until the urgent matter of recruiting White 2 was resolved and returned to Kalai Bali. Absolutely use your own clown throwing knife to make Mr. 3, a foolish guy, feel the feelings. Why are the flowers so red? Do. What Bucky never expected was that just when he was thinking about how to get revenge on Mr. 3, there was a sudden vibration from the kit on his thigh, and a strange sound similar to a phone bug. Is there anything else hidden in it? Following the location where the vibration came out, Bucky found a miniature snail specially designed to store videos and another small note with text in the hidden pocket hidden in the gray-white kit. With the lessons from the previous 2 times, Bucky became inexplicably cautious in spreading out the note this time, and he was even ready to tear it to shreds in an instant if there was still no nutritious garbage in it. In his suspicious eyes, the small note was carefully unfolded. Bucky's pupils shrank suddenly. What caught my eye were 2 completely unexpected big characters. Suicide note. On the other side, on the endless sea level, the narrow white candle channel meets the cold flow channel. What an unexpected meeting, Boya Hancock. Wearing a dark green coat and a headscarf, Kuzan parked his sea bicycle and stepped directly on the surging sea level with his feet raised. A burst of cold air was released from his foothold, and the moment the black boots touched the seawater, hard ice floes formed immediately. Under the gaze of Hancock, whose muscles were tense, Kuzan walked slowly on the sea surface with such ease, and leisurely stepped onto the land of candles released by Mr. 3. Whoosh. Because of the weight of one more person, the candle land, which is not wide enough to cover, swayed suddenly, showing a very unstable tilt angle. Just when the unbalanced candle land was about to sink, the cold air surged, and giant floes with a length of tens of meters were rapidly formed around it, successfully offsetting the sinking trend of candle land. Kuzan. I didn't expect to meet you here. Deep alertness circulated in Hancock's eyes, and his breath rose little by little until he was at his best. After all, what was standing in front of him was the strongest combat power of the former Navy headquarters. Although it was reported that he had joined the Blackbeard gang, the terrifying pressure was there. If you are not ready to fight at any time, you will most likely be frozen into crushed ice in the next second. Don't be so nervous. I'm just curious about the overlord color that suddenly bloomed on the sea. I don't mean to fight you, and there is no reason. In order to express his attitude, Kuzan took the initiative to raise both palms and insert them into his pants pockets. Although it is domineering, its strength and precision are quite limited, and it is not like a senior powerhouse like you. That is to say, it wasn't until Hancock relaxed a little that Kuzan turned his head slowly and put his eyes on Mr. 3 next to him. The black sunglasses absorb all the sunlight that is projected down, and it is impossible to see what kind of eyes are hidden under them. Gardino, do you even have the qualifications of a king? That's right. This uncle is Mr. 3 with a domineering look, a mere former admiral of the Navy. Your tone is crazy? A confident smile appeared on Mr. 3's calm face, and a violent and tyrannical power bloomed from his body, instantly covering the field composed of candles and ice flows. Kuzan, let me Mr. 3, come and try your skills. Is it really worthy of the so-called Navy's highest combat power? The realm unfolds, candle purgatory. Under the domineering blessing of the Overlord, Mr. 3's breath skyrocketed, and the surging liquid candles extended from his feet to all directions, covering the giant ice flows, turning into an absolute candle field. A flash of red light flashed in Mr. 3's eyes, and the domineering and armed colors were turned on at the same time, blessing the power of the candle purgatory to the current maximum power. Whoosh whoosh. The overwhelming candle ghost hands and candle weapons condensed in an instant, and rushed towards the center of the field with a speed like a bamboo, and Kuzan, who still kept his hands in his pockets. Ah, is this your welcome ceremony? Kuzan raised his head slightly, stared calmly at the rapidly expanding candle attack in his pupils, and slowly pulled his hands out of his trouser pockets. Ice Age. Emotionless words floated out of the corners of his mouth, which exuded a faint cold air. Whoosh. In the next second, the cold current surged, the ice and snow came, and the galloping candle ghost hand weapon, together with the entire fluid candle field, was instantly solidified into thick ice. When the cold air hit, Mr. 3 sensed it, raised his right hand, and wanted to use the candle wall to resist the freezing. However, he still underestimated the speed at which the former admiral of the Navy released his skills. As soon as he raised his hand, he was frozen into an ice sculpture. Ended. Kuzan walked slowly, raised his right leg expressionlessly, and stepped on the ice sculpture Mr. 3. Click. The ice sculpture instantly shattered and turned into ice shards flying all over the sky. Along with it, there is also the scene simulation of the battle against Aokiji in Mr. 3's heart. The level is too different, and it is not an opponent at all. Mr. 3, who had withdrawn from the simulation, looked up at Kuzan, with a few drops of cold sweat oozing out of his forehead. Even if you are separated by a distance of several meters, just listening to the calm voice of the other party, you can feel a strong sense of oppression that is about to suffocate. This is the strongest combat power of the Navy headquarters. Don't be too nervous. If you really want to do it, I'm not the kind of person who grinds and chirps. Seeing that Mr. 3 didn't respond for a while, Kuzan once again showed that he was not malicious. Facing the former admiral, how could you not be nervous? Mr. 3 took a deep breath, put away his extra thoughts, and said slowly, "But it's an honor. I didn't expect you to remember my name." If the person standing opposite at this time is a kainu who implements absolute justice, he will definitely turn his head and run without any hesitation. But Kuzan's words, according to the image in the original book, are not the kind of character who kills for no reason. Let's make a big fight with Bucky the Clown, disguised as an executioner, and rescue Fire Fist Ace under the eyes of Sengoku Carp, thus changing the whole war situation. Ku sighed in admiration, bowed his head slightly, and the round-framed sunglasses reflected the figure of Mr. 3 in front of him. For a man with far-reaching vision and extraordinary power like you, it's even more strange if you don't know him. Thinking of the domineering arrogance he felt before Mr. 3 responded, Kuzan raised his head and sighed, and said to himself, "That's right. If you think about it this way, it makes sense that you have the qualifications of a king. What's more, it's more of a fluke." Mr. 3 scratched his head and said something polite. Kuzan looked away from Mr. 3 and looked back at Hancock, who was standing beside the convertible car. The eyes hidden under the sunglasses flickered with a rather surprised look. No matter how you look at these two people standing together, there is always an inexplicable sense of separation. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have imagined that the two of you would act together, or in such a strange way. Not to mention Kuzan, who has long since left the Navy. The combination of Hancock and Mr. 3, and even the well-informed Sengoku Carp had to shout, "Fuck," when they saw it. What do you think? the cold and arrogant Hancock and the sinister and cunning Mr. 3 can't be the same person. There is no way. After the Qiwuhai system is completely abolished, the world is about to enter an era of great chaos. If the two pirates do not get together to warm up, we will surely die miserably. Mr. 3 shrugged helplessly. His answer was vague and artistic, deftly avoiding the real purpose of wanting to gather all the old and new Shicibukai. Although Kuzan's character was trustworthy, no matter what he said, the man who used to be a navy in front of him still had his own justice in his heart. And they are essentially heinous pirates. That's it. As expected of the smartest guy living in this sea, it seems that you, who are keen, have noticed something. Kuzan nodded slightly, standing still, wondering what he was thinking. After announcing your withdrawal from the Navy, you joined the Blackbeard pirates without warning. Didn't you have a plan? Mr. 3 murmured in his heart that the fact that Kuzan joined Blackbeard has always been one of the hotspots of speculation and discussion among Jaime people. Of course, it's impossible to ask the Jaime directly. He is afraid that he will really be frozen into an ice sculpture and his corpse will sink into the sea. Speaking of which, your bicycle looks strangely familiar. Kuzan put away many thoughts in his heart, turned his head and set his eyes on the sea bike beside Mr. 3. This car is actually the same model as his, and it also has a gorgeous carriage that can pull people, so. Kind of outrageous. As the founder of Seabike, Kuzan was quite curious about Mr. 3's behavior as early as the first sight he met. Haha, I learned from you. Mr. 3 told the truth without concealment. I just wanted to imitate the Admiral of the Navy, but I never imagined that the precise control and continuous development of the fruit's ability would have unexpected and miraculous effects while riding a bicycle on the sea. So that's the case. Have you even discovered this secret? Kuzan's face was smiling, and his mother sold the criticism. I have worked so hard to find out the way of fruit training, but you have learned it so easily. How about a sea cycling race? Mr. 3 challenged on a whim. If your strength can't beat you, can you still be weak in your ability to ride a bike? Pullman also has an invincible heart. Hancock was startled by this sudden provocation, and reminded in a low voice, Hey, Mr. 3, Kuzan is on the opposite side, why do you dare? The corners of Mr. 3's mouth twitched slightly. Why? With this expert rider-level sweat towel around my neck. Kuzan. What's going on with this kind of unfolding that you can't even perceive? To be honest, I'm really interested. Kuzan slowly turned around, pulled his hand out of his trouser pocket, and waved at Mr. 3 and Hancock. But not now, I'm in a hurry, goodbye. After all, the oppressive former admiral walked back to the beginning of the flow passage, turned over and got on his bicycle to start the journey again. Under the gaze of Mr. 3 and Hancock, the slightly lonely figure gradually disappeared into the distant horizon. No one knows where his destination is, and no one knows what this gentle man wants to do. The only thing that is certain is that one day in the future, he will bring earth-shattering influence to the world pattern. Let's move on, too. Mr. 3 withdrew his gaze, without too much delay, dragged Hancock in the carriage and continued to rush to the island where Crocodile was located. New World, 3-column roundabout, A island port. Hey. Look, the sea, on the sea, someone on a bicycle is approaching. Brother, are you still awake? What kind of bicycle can ride on the sea? Go away. Let me see. I told you to go to town to get a pair of reading glasses, and I don't even think about it. Fuck. Does anyone really ride a bicycle at sea? Fucking behind. Dragging a carriage? On the observation tower next to the port, several administrators rubbed their eyes frantically. After confirming that what they saw in the telescope was not a mirage, they all rushed down the tower with a surprised look and stood on the port to watch. Under their disbelief, Mr. 3 on the bike picked up the towel around his neck and wiped off the sweat. Although the long sea ride was completed without any risk, the double consumption of physical and mental strength still made him gasp for breath, which was more tiring than fighting a tough battle. This kind of cultivation method is really not easy at all. Mr. 3 sighed lightly, directly ignoring the stunned port administrators, and used his abilities to create a candle passage leading directly to the island. You should be the administrators of this island, right? We came here by bike, so there should be no need to pay the boat management fee, right? Mr. 3 looked up and said to the administrators on both sides. The management staff all stood there in a daze, a little overwhelmed. As old employees who have worked here for more than 10 years, They have never encountered such a situation, and they can't even dream of such a strange thing. According to the island management guidelines, they do have the right and requirement to charge foreigners for ship management fees, but this is a bicycle a boat? It doesn't count. Or should a bicycle that can ride on the sea be called a bicycle? Never heard of this stuff. No, no sir. This is Island A of the Three-Pillar Roundabout. You are welcome to come, and I wish you a good time. In the end, an old administrator with deep experience shrank his pupils, stood up tremblingly, and greeted Mr. 3 and Hancock in the carriage with a smile. Thank you very much then. Mr. 3 waved his hand and drove towards the town on the island without looking back. It was not until their figures disappeared at the end of the field of vision that the young administrators swarmed up and surrounded the old man. Hey, old guy, don't you usually like to extort foreign businessmen the most? Why is it so abnormal today? A strange light flashed in the old man's cloudy eyes. You guys, didn't you see the woman sitting in the carriage? I see. I rubbed. Those legs are really big. Ah no, that chest is really long. A young and vigorous administrator raised his hand to answer. Boom. What greeted him was the merciless iron fist of the old man. Be careful when you speak, don't even know how you died. The old man angrily scolded the male administrators with blurred eyes around him. After calming down, he said slowly, if you have nothing to do, just read more newspapers. The woman who was sitting in the carriage just now is the original king who went to the Qiwuhai Sea, the cruel and cold-blooded pirate queen, Boya Hancock. As soon as this statement came out, it was like a heavy fist, bombarding the administrators who were thinking again and again, making them tremble in shock. Hi, Pirate Empress. What is she doing here at Three Pillars Circle Island? The man who raised his hand to answer just now turned pale with fright and slumped to the ground. I don't know, but what is certain is that it is absolutely inseparable from the person from Island C. Thinking of this, the old man sighed faintly. I hope that the contact between these two will not bring destruction to the Three-Pillar Roundabout. Within the island. Mr. 3, didn't you say that you have already contacted the commissioner of the Bucky Express mercenary group who was lurking here in advance? Why is there no movement yet? Hancock walked on the wide streets of the island, while looking at this rather stylish town, similar to Rogue Town. He asked Mr. 3 in a low voice. Don't worry. According to the information provided by the commissioner, they are coming from Island C at this time. Mr. 3 replied calmly. As early as when he received the information and rushed here, he had already understood the geographical environment of the Three Pillars Roundabout in advance. This triangular-shaped island consists of 3 sub-islands connected end to end. Among them, Island A is the small island at their feet, and it is the core island of the Three-Pillar Roundabout. Nearly 70.00% of the residents of Sanjuhan Island live here, and they have a relatively complete urban life system, which is similar to other ordinary islands in the New World. Island B is a primitive island completely covered by forests and hills. There are a wide variety of fruit trees and various ferocious beasts growing on it. It is the main source of food for the other 2 sub-islands. As for Island C, it was supposed to be a town island similar to Island A, but after all, this is a turbulent new world, and arrogant and vicious pirates will invade the island at any time. Because the geographical environment is relatively remote, although there is a navy stationed on the island, the level is not very high, and it is difficult to form a sufficient deterrent to the arrogant pirates. The pirates are also afraid of the navy, for fear that the complete occupation of the Three-Pillar Roundabout will provoke a stronger navy. Over time, the town of Sea Island has become a gathering place for pirates by default, chaotic, sinister, dark, crazy. Only the aboriginal residents who are bold or have some strength dare to live and make money there. On the whole, the Three-Pillar Roundabout is simply the epitome of the New World pattern. Both the Navy and the pirates have reached a consensus in a tacit understanding. While waiting for the commissioner to arrive, Mr. 3 did not wander around, but called out the system panel in the back of his mind to check the improvement he had achieved during this difficult ride. The strongest Emperor subsystem, host, Mr. 3. Appearance. 71 physical fitness. A. Lucky value. E+S. The clown Bucky camp has its own buff, it will disappear when it leaves. Ability. Wax fruit. Accuracy 89%, strength 76%, characteristics 72%. Unawakened. Armed color domineering. Normal. Scene color domineering. Normal. Overlord color domineering. Mang Shin. Props. The same type of C-bike as the former Admiral Aokiji. The progress of making a black bike is 1%. Main line goal. Omitted, target reward, same as above. Target reward 2 Qiwuhai, same as above. Physical fitness turned into A. Mr. 3 looked a little surprised. When he fought with Vice Admiral Stellas before, his physical fitness was only B++. Never imagined that after a ride at sea, it would break through to A. Mr. 3 raised his hand and clenched his fist. I don't know if it was an illusion, but he actually felt that his body was stronger. As expected of a system product that can double the training effect, the attributes of this C-bike are indeed quite fierce. He sighed in his heart. Of course, he knew very well that this was just an aid, and he could practice along the way when he was on the road. As for deliberately riding a bicycle to stroll on the sea, it is completely unnecessary. It's fine in peacetime, but now, where's the time to exercise so leisurely? Mr. 3 quickly turned his attention from the physical fitness in the fruit progress of the small improvement, and fell on the attributes of the C-bike. The progress of refining a black car is 1%. In other words, when the bicycle really becomes a black car, will it also trigger special effects? Mr. 3 was looking forward to it, but when he thought that he only improved by 1% after riding for a long time, he shook his head reluctantly. If the strength of the domineering of the armed color has not increased, just use the domineering of the ordinary level to nourish it. It is estimated that it will be the year of the monkey and the month of the horse to become a black car. I still have to speed up the cultivation of domineering. Just as Mr. 3 sighed, a little girl's cry suddenly came from the town street ahead. Woo, the key is gone, it's locked, and the rabbit is locked and can't get out. Mr. 3 and Hancock stopped at the same time. Looking up and looking forward, I saw a little girl with 2 cute ponytails, holding a pet cage almost the same size as her in both hands, crying with tears in her eyes. Whose child dares to stand in the way of the concubine? Hancock's eyes sank, and he walked towards the little girl standing in the middle of the road. Of course, she is unlikely to treat the little girl like the little wild cat and the little seal that kicked the road. Since it's the pet cage in your hand that makes you cry and run down the street, then let me help you and kick the cage and the rabbits into pieces. This was the truest thought in her heart at this time. Wait, Hancock. Mr. 3 shouted to stop Hancock, let me come. After that, he walked quickly to the crying little girl and squatted down, looking down at the lock on the pet cage. A very ordinary small iron lock does not even have a specially customized keyhole, and it can be opened with any key of the same style. Compared with the handcuffs of the prisoners of the advancing city and the handcuffs of the execution of Ace, it is not too simple. Whoosh. A small flame emerged from the hairstyle of Mr. 3's head, and he stretched out the index finger of his right hand, which was covered by a white candle. After being twisted and deformed for a while, it turned into a hard candle key. Click. The key was inserted into the hole and turned slightly, and the iron lock that tightly locked the cage was opened. Okay, kid. The cage has been opened, don't cry. Mr. 3 reached out and touched the little girl's head, with a small smile on the corner of his mouth. Fortunately, his appearance is normal now, and his temperament is reasonable, so he won't frighten the little girl to cry more. Thank you. Thank you, uncle. The little girl raised her head and looked at the lock held by Mr. 3. The tears in her big eyes suddenly stopped. She happily hugged the iron cage and ran away quickly, disappearing in the blink of an eye. I didn't expect Mr. 3 of the Bucky Pirates, known for being insidious and cunning, to have such a side. The slender figure came from behind. Hancock put one hand on his slender waist, and looked at Mr. 3 with a thoughtful look. I should show that little guy how you killed the enemy with candles. Are you the devil? Mr. 3 clapped his hands, stood up slowly, and corrected, don't get me wrong. I didn't want to help her. I just felt uncomfortable when I saw the lock that couldn't be unlocked. He was telling the truth. The moment he saw the cage, what came to his mind was the lock that couldn't be unlocked, not the little girl who was crying. There seems to be an indescribable power in the dark, urging him to unlock the lock quickly. Well, the title of Pirate King is not for nothing. Hearing this, Hancock was obviously stunned for a moment. After confirming that Mr. 3 was not lying, he commented coldly, it's really inexplicable instinct. You know maybe Ralph Drew's great secret treasure needs to be opened with my ability. Mr. 3 gave Hancock a middle finger in his heart. What are you thinking? Hancock frowned slightly, and her eyes seemed to capture malice. I was thinking about how terrifying it would be if my fruit ability was awakened, Mr. 3 said. A terrible thing. Do you mean to say that it can open the locks of the whole world? Hancock said, a rare cold joke. What caught her off guard was that Mr. 3's joke was even colder. No, if the fruit awakens, I will be able to celebrate birthdays for people all over the world. The atmosphere suddenly fell into a brief silence. Haven't the commissioner of the connector arrived yet? If you don't hurry up, I'm afraid I can't help turning the males with disgusting eyes on both sides of the street into stone. Hancock changed the subject and turned his attention to the male residents standing around. No man, not even a woman, can resist the charm of the world's #1 beauty. Fortunately, a few minutes later, the special agent of the Bucky Express mercenary group finally appeared in their field of vision. Contrary to Mr. 3's expectations, this guy is actually a short-haired beauty with an amazing body. Obviously all the contacts were male voices. Under the leadership of this short-haired beauty commissioner, Mr. 3 and Hancock passed through the town of Island A and came to Island C, which was relatively chaotic and crazy. The recruiting action meeting for Crocodile takes place in a large, dimly lit but beautifully furnished room. Hello, third brother. Hello, Lord Snake. I'm very sorry, I have been staring at Crocodile's actions before, and I couldn't contact you directly. Now, allow me to formally introduce myself. I am a subordinate of the Bucky Express Mercenary Corps, a special commissioner specializing in special tasks in intelligence collection, Ayasha. Ayasha took a step back and bowed respectfully. The contours of her face are perfect, with a pair of azure blue eyes flashing with scorching brilliance, and her short hair as fiery red as the sun gives a strong visual impact. She was wearing a sassy and simple black wallet. Under the same dark-style shorts, there were slender and well-proportioned legs, and further down, there were still black short boots. It is worth noting that Ayasha has a slender long knife on her waist, which means that she should be a master at using knives. After all, to be able to be a special agent in the strong Bucky Express, his strength will definitely not be too weak. Don't be too cautious, sit down. Although Mr. 3 was amazed by Ayasha's first-class face, during the time he spent with Hancock, he was able to face such beautiful women who commonly appear in the world of One Piece, so he didn't delay much. As for Ayasha's credibility, he didn't doubt it too much. No matter what, Bucky can't send a guy with unclear background to cooperate with the implementation of such a big event as the recruitment of Crocodile. Yes. Ayasha nodded heavily, her body was as stiff as a robot. She pulled away the chair, and sat up awkwardly. After sitting, she straightened her waist with a nervous look, folded her hands, and placed it on the conference table very upright. Just like a student who listens carefully to the class. Logically speaking, as a special commissioner, it shouldn't be so bad even though Mr. 3 and Hancock were in front of her. Although Mr. 3 noticed the strangeness of Ayasha, she was the leader of the Bucky Express force on the Three-Pillar Ring Island after all, and it was impossible to temporarily replace her, so she temporarily put aside her doubts. After pondering for a few seconds, Mr. 3 said straight to the point, "Then I won't talk nonsense. Regarding the action arrangement for recruiting Crocodile this time, my thoughts are very simple, that is. Beat. Compared with Hancock, who was once a slave of the dragons, the almost perfect Crocodile has no weaknesses that can be exploited. Although there is one in Ivankov, the old thief Oda has not announced it yet, and Mr. 3 will naturally not know. It is not realistic for an aloof and shrewd strongman like him to pit him into the Bucky pirates by chance. Therefore, after comprehensive consideration, Mr. 3 decided to use the roughest way to solve Crocodile. Of course, the method is rude, but the planning and design that needs to be used are not simple at all. Because, is this possible? From what I know about Crocodile, it's hard to beat him. He doesn't seem like the kind of man who would succumb to power. Hancock frowned, his eyes darkened, and he looked like he was full of expectations. This Mr. 3 was very confident throughout the whole process. He thought he had a good plan, but he didn't expect it to be so straightforward. Ha ha. As if he had already guessed Hancock's questioning, Mr. 3 raised his hand and pushed the goggles, his mouth slightly raised, revealing a very sinister smile. If you can't do it with one meal, how about two? If you can't do it with 2 meals, then what about 3 meals? Hearing this, Hancock was greatly shocked, and sat on the spot, dumbfounded. Satisfied with her response, Mr. 3 stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of the room. In my hometown, there is an illusion of 7 captures of Menghuo. To sum it up simply, it is the story of a brave and fearless tribal chief who would rather die than surrender. He was let go 7 times and beaten 7 times, and finally had to surrender. A leisurely voice floated out from his hidden back, bringing a little chill to Hancock and Ayasha. And this is exactly one of the 36 strategies, playing hard to get. Having said that, Mr. 3 turned to look at Hancock sitting in the chair. Hancock, how do you think Crocodile's arrogance is compared with that of an ambitious tribal chief? How many rounds of beatings can he sustain? In Hancock's field of vision, the thin Mr. 3 suddenly became more intimidating than the 4 emperors. She imagined a little bit of Crocodile being caught and beaten, beaten and released, released and caught again. Hiss. Even though she was the pirate queen who had seen strong winds and waves, she couldn't help but feel chills down her spine at this moment, and mourned in her heart for Crocodile, who was about to usher in a tragic fate. At the same time, she completely understood why Mr. 3 had to accompany her at the meeting in Qiwuhai, Bali. Because, only with Mr. 3, who has just awakened his tyrannical appearance and his strength is still quite limited, it is impossible to realize this strategy called, play hard to escape. Is this the 36 meter? After listening to Mr. 3's action plan for recruiting Crocodile, Hancock, who bit the nail of his right index finger, whispered to himself, feeling even more surprised by the mysterious 3 tricks in Mr. 36's hometown. Suddenly, a red light flashed in the depths of Hancock's beautiful eyes, and he turned his head sharply to look at Mr. 3 standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Whoosh! Just as she was about to make a move, a black afterimage slipped past her eyes. Ayasha, who had been sitting at the conference table, listening to the lectures carefully from the beginning, was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, she came to Mr. 3. She hunched over, her blue eyes full of murderous intent, pressed down the scabbard around her waist with one hand, and gently moved the hilt with her right thumb. Only heard the sound of jung. The long knife was unsheathed, turned into a flashing cold light, and cut down Mr. 3's back with an extremely fierce and swift offensive. Whoa! In front of Mr. 3, the floor-to-ceiling windows with closed curtains and the sturdy concrete walls were split open by jet-black knife air. Under the suddenly bright external light, the sky was filled with rubble and glass shards. With it, there is a splash of blood. What? Along with the miserable and painful screams, a figure fell along the broken windowsill, and fell heavily on the street downstairs. What the hell? What's the situation? Mr. 3 exclaimed in his heart. Everything happened in a flash of lightning, and when he reacted, the short-haired beauty beside him had already retracted the jet-black long knife back into the scabbard, and stood valiantly in place. Ayasha's cold and pretty face was full of chills, but when she looked at Mr. 3 with a calm, actually confused, face next to her, the chilling temperament disappeared in an instant, only panic was left. Messy and overwhelmed. Brother 3, I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry. As the commissioner of the 3 Pillars roundabout, I didn't notice the pirates hiding outside the window right away. It turns out that the reason why you walked to the floor-to-ceiling window while talking, Brother 3, is to remind the stupid me that there are enemies outside the window. Damn, I'm so damned, I can't even see such an obvious hint. Ayasha headed towards Mr. 3, her body bowed 90 degrees, and her movements were quite exaggerated. Huh. Mr. 3's expression was stunned. He is only at the level of ordinary people, but he simply feels that standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with his hands behind his back, leaving a hidden back behind him is more compelling, and it is impossible to detect the enemy outside the window. Cough cough. Looking at Ayasha, who was so nervous that her whole body was trembling slightly, Mr. 3 coughed a few times, restrained the astonishment on his face, and said indifferently, "Forget it, I don't blame you. How can I say that you also responded immediately? Did not let me down. Thank you very much for your forgiveness." Ayasha raised her head, still using honorifics. This kind of submissiveness is completely different from the violent appearance of drawing a knife and beheading people just now. It's strange, Mr. 3 in the original book didn't have much contact with the mercenary group. Why is this special commissioner so afraid of me? Mr. 3 frowned slightly, with a confused look on his face. Compared to Mr. 3, I'm more interested in your quick reaction just now. Hancock walked slowly on high heels. Ayasha's figure reflected in the depths of his beautiful eyes, How far have you been in your practice? Although he is very unwilling, it is barely understandable that a strong man like Mr. 3 is more hidden than her. But this little girl who looks very young in front of her eyes is actually on the same level as her. How can this be? Master Wei Sheji, I'm not very good at seeing and hearing. The reason why I can detect the existence of the enemy is mainly because of my fruit ability. Ayasha looked at Hancock and replied respectfully. From her straight-waist and unrelenting eyes, it is not difficult to see that her admiration and fear of Hancock is very limited, and she cannot be compared with Mr. 3 at all. This makes things even more strange. After all, in terms of title or prestige, Hancock, who is also the captain of Shicibukai with Bucky the Clown, should be more oppressive. Are you also a devil fruit person? Yes. Ayasha did not hold back and explained her devil fruit ability to Mr. 3 and Hancock. It turns out that, no wonder your perception is so sharp. Hancock nodded, knowing it in his heart. After solving her doubts, she looked up at Mr. 3 with a serious expression. Mr. 3, that pirate just now. It's probably the eyeliner sent by Crocodile. Mr. 3 sighed calmly. After all, my old boss is cautious and sensitive, but he is famous. We came to the three-pillar roundabout with such a swagger. He didn't react at all, but it was even more strange. Then the next play-by-play plan. Hancock hesitated. The corner of Mr. 3's mouth raised a signature confident smile. He knew in advance that we were on the island or not. It didn't affect the next beating he was going to endure, didn't he? With such a high-hearted character as Crocodile, it is impossible for him to be scared to hide or turn his head and run away when he hears that Yuan's subordinates and the Pirate Queen have landed on the island. Even the timid Bucky is not so wretched. Understood. The enlightened Hancock nodded and held a moment of silence for Lao Sha again. Since everyone has already greeted us, it doesn't seem to make sense if we don't come to visit. Mr. 3 patted the dust on his clothes and asked Ayasha, where is Crocodile now? This is a situation long overdue. According to the information, now he and his subordinates are reading newspapers in a tavern in the town. Send someone to lead the way. Having said that, Mr. 3 turned and walked towards the door of the room, followed by Hancock. Brother 3, then, what about me? Ayasha stood blankly on the spot, raised her finger and pointed at herself. You stay here for now. If something unexpected happens, you can always respond. Mr. 3's voice came from the door. Although he is now teaming up with Hancock, there should be no big problem in trying to control Crocodile, but after all, the other party is an old fritter who has been in the sea for decades. Okay. I understand. It wasn't until Mr. 3's figure completely disappeared from view that Ayasha's tense nerves were able to breathe, and the whole person relaxed in an instant. Sure enough, the real third brother is much better looking than the photos, and he is also super domineering, and he can command a strong person like the Pirate Empress. Looking at the chaotic city sea streets along the broken windowsill, Ayasha's eyes flashed with yearning light. Soon, the light in her eyes gradually dimmed again. She lightly covered the long knife at her waist, and sighed with disappointment on her face. The mercenary group that I joined because I wanted to meet him quickly, but I really did meet, but I didn't even have the courage to ask for an autograph. It's still too bad. The words were divided into two parts. Under the leadership of the intelligence officers, Mr. 3 and Hancock walked on the streets of Sea Island in the harsh environment. After teaching a few short-eyed pirates who covet Hancock's beauty, he went around and finally came to the tavern where Crocodile was. Perhaps it was because of the presence of a very important person. The tavern that was supposed to be noisy and lively seemed very quiet. Just standing at the door, you can deeply feel the sense of oppression coming from inside. Mr. 3 ignored the gaze of the tavern guard at the entrance, stepped forward, raised his hand and pushed open the wooden double door. The purpose of this trip is very simple. It is simply to find Crocodile to fight. Naturally, there is no need for too many twists and turns. Crunch. As the wooden door was opened, the sunlight outside swayed in like no money, bringing a touch of light to the dark and depressing tavern. Mr. 3 stepped on his own shadow, stood in the sunlight, and glanced over the interior of the tavern. Soon, it was locked on the man sitting on a leather sofa in the corner, smoking a smoke ring. I saw Crocodile with a big back, wearing a handsome black suit, sitting casually, with a large-lit cigar in his mouth. A group of big men with the same suit style sat around him, looking like a mafia big brother. Seeing Mr. 3 who broke into the tavern, Crocodile, who had already received the news, was not surprised at all, and there was even a meaningful smile on the corner of his mouth. He put down the newspaper in his hand, looked up at Mr. 3, and a thick, magnetic voice slowly floated out. Yo, Shicibukai, Mr. Siri. Click, click. The sound of high heels stepping on the wooden floor resounded in the silent atmosphere. Hancock, who was wearing a lavender 9-snake cheongsam, followed Mr. 3 and walked slowly into the tavern. Every step of the world's one beauty attracted the attention of all the big men in black suits present, causing them to swallow their saliva, and their nerves became tense in an instant. The main reason is not Hancock's beauty, but the title that is very deterrent just to say it, Pirate Queen. Boya Hancock, I didn't expect you to act together with this guy Galtino. After the world government abolished the Qiwuhai system, did the 9-snake pirates join forces with the Bucky pirates? Crocodile slowly put away the smile on the corner of his mouth. Compared with Mr. 3, who was not very useful, he showed considerable fear to Hancock, who was also a veteran of Shicibukai. So, what's the matter with you coming here to find me? Crocodile picked up the tissue on the wine table and wiped the golden hook on his left arm leisurely. Although he is afraid of Hancock, he is not afraid of him because of his strength and temperament. I'm sorry, Crocodile, it's not me who wants to tell you something. Hancock raised his hand and waved lightly in front of him. Whoosh. A strong gust of wind suddenly formed, blowing away the thick cigar smoke that filled the tavern. Breathing in the fresh air, Hancock walked to a chair near the wine table expressionlessly, staring grimly at the few drops of wine dripping on it. Deep in my heart, I couldn't help but feel remorse. It was a major mistake. I had known that I had brought Salome, giant pink python, here. Standing next to Mr. 3's eyes, he immediately saw the disgust and embarrassment exuding from the noble empress, and immediately threw a pure white candle in his hand. Whizzing. The white candle ball twists and changes in the air, and when it falls on the floor at Hancock's feet, it has become a beautifully crafted candle chair. Damn, Mr. 3, what does this mean? Concubine needs your help. Hancock snorted softly, expressing dissatisfaction and contempt for Mr. 3's unnecessary behavior in his heart. But in the next second, with her arms around her chest, she sat up on the candle chair without hesitation, her slender and perfect long legs folded together, and her movements were quite smooth and natural. Since she decided to go to sea with Mr. 3 to find Crocodile, she has regarded this man who had the same slave experience as her as a companion, and naturally she would not really mind the candle chair. Seeing her so cooperative, Mr. 3 stopped being distracted and focused all his attention on Crocodile on the opposite side. Oh? That means. Crocodile turned his head and looked at Mr. 3. Mr. 3, are you looking for me? There was no superfluous expression on his face with a terrifying cut, but his heart was actually filled with deep doubts. With the temper of a woman like Hancock, how could it be possible to trust Galtino so much? Or, did the Bucky pirates and the 9-snake pirates really reach some kind of agreement, or an alliance? What is the purpose of this duo who came here to find me on purpose? Mr. 3 met Crocodile's sharp eyes without flinching, and his whole body was highly concentrated. The battle with this sinister and sophisticated sand crocodile begins now. Yes, after the abolition of the Qiwuhai system, all the privileges of the Bucky pirates will be cancelled, and the entire pirate world is about to usher in an era of great chaos. So, Mr. 0, I want to return to the commune team and face the turbulent new world with you. Mr. 3 deliberately called Crocodile's original codename. The resolute eyes and sincere words all reveal the spirit of an old actor. Acting has become commonplace for him. Without waiting for Crocodile to answer, standing next to the leather sofa, Mr. 1 Das Bonus, with a bald head and a sturdy body, was the first to speak out, angrily scolding. Mr. 3, so far, you still have the face to say that you were returning to the club. What do you think of this place? His emotions were very excited. As a former companion, what he despised the most was Mr. 3, a stalker like a rudder. Men's dreams are different. Since they choose to follow Bucky the Clown, they should follow through to the end. How can they run away to find a home when they encounter a crisis? Don't worry, after all, he used to be a companion, and he was able to persuade Hancock to follow him closely. There must have been a lot of growth in the past 2 years. Crocodile stopped the simple-minded Mr. 1. He didn't think Mr. 3 really came to seek refuge. After pondering for a while, he decided to follow the meaning of Mr. 3, take the retreat as the advance, and first touch the heart of the two people in front of him. If that's what your trip is about, then, Mr. 3, welcome back to my team. Crocodile opened his arms and smiled in a welcome gesture. However, Mr. 3's next few words caused the smile on the corner of his mouth to freeze, and his relaxed and confident face instantly became extremely gloomy. Ah? Sorry, Mr. 0, you seem to have misunderstood me a bit. Mr. 3 scratched his head with a dry smile, and said seriously, when I said returning to the club, I wanted to join as the boss and lead you to fight against the chaotic era. So, to be precise, it's not your team, but my team. Puff. As soon as these words came out, the first person who couldn't hold back was Hancock. If it wasn't for the cold temperament of the Pirate Queen, she would probably laugh out loud. The scene in front of her is exactly the same as the scene where Mr. 3 retorted that she wanted to recruit the 9 Snake Pirates after she promised Mr. 3 to join the Bucky Pirates in 9 Snake City. Crocodile's lungs are about to explode with rage now. Thinking of the anger that surged out of him at the time, and looking at Crocodile, whose face had become extremely ugly, Hancock really wanted to laugh. You know, say, what? As Hancock had expected, even Crocodile, who was calm and forbearing, could not help but burst into rage after such a blatant provocation. The ferocious aura burst out and swept the entire tavern. Feeling the pure and strong killing intent emanating from Crocodile, Mr. 3 was not afraid but rejoiced. Because his first psychological battle has been won, he successfully angered Crocodile, making him unable to keep his absolute calm, and completely lose his dominance in the next confrontation. Then, next is on the issue of the belonging of the leader of the society. Mr. 3 bowed his head slightly and looked at Crocodile, who was sitting on the leather sofa, who was on the verge of rage. There was no fear in his eyes, and his blood gradually boiled. Let's duel, Crocodile. Goo ha 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 ha. Interesting, Mr. 3, you want to duel me? This is really interesting. Crocodile leaned back on the leather sofa, throwing his head back in his signature laugh. President, let me come. Daz Bonus walked slowly, his naturally falling arms flashing coldly, turning into 2 extremely sharp blades. After eating the Qiwuhai fruit to become a blade man, he can turn any part of his body into a sharp blade. He has been with Crocodile in the New World for 2 years, and with the blessing of armed domineering, his strength has undoubtedly increased a lot. In the eyes of Daz Bonus, the Pirate Empress sitting not far away is the person that President Crocodile should target, and a mere Mr. 3 is not qualified enough. No, it's rare that Mr. 3 wants to die so much, so let me catch up with him after a long absence. Crocodile put away his wanton and frivolous laugh, slowly stood up from the leather sofa, and his sharp eyes were gloomy. After a brief moment of anger, the thoughtful man quickly regained his composure. Although he knew the purpose of Mr. 3's trip, it was definitely not as simple as one-on-one, but Hancock was the only one who really made him take mental precautions, as long as he took a little precaution during the battle. Thinking deeply, this can also use Mr. 3 to show his fist a little, so that Hancock can retreat. After all, in the past 2 years in the New World, he has never slacked off. Of course, the most important reason is that Crocodile couldn't help it, and wanted to personally destroy the incomprehensible Mr. 3 in front of him. Beat up. Mr. 3, you must be ready. Crocodile confidently reminded Mr. 3 before attacking, and then suddenly raised his right hand, bending his 5 fingers, condensing a high-speed rotating miniature sandstorm in his palm. Salin. Whoosh. Crocodile raised his hand and threw the sandstorm towards Mr. 3. The moment he left his hand, the palm-sized sandstorm frantically stirred the surrounding air, expanding and growing at a rapid rate visible to the naked eye. The resulting terrifying attraction sucked the tables, chairs, floors and other objects in the tavern into the center of the storm, and then crushed them into pieces, mixed with the yellow sand in the sky and attacked Mr. 3. Candlewall. The hair on Mr. 3's head, who had been on guard for a long time, ignited a flame. With a big wave of his hand, he directly used his signature skills to create a solid wall of candles in front of him. Boom. The sandstorm hit the candle wall head on, and the 2 sides collided to form a powerful shockwave that spread in all directions, causing the wine bottles placed in the tavern to shatter one after another, and the bright red wines flowed all over the place. Before the wine could soak the slightly trembling wooden floor, it was sucked into it by a more powerful sandstorm, leaving no trace. This is the difficulty of Crocodile's trick, Shalon. It can increase with time. If there is no strong attack to interrupt it, it will evolve to an uncontrollable level. Sizzle sizzle. Feeling that the candle wall in front of him was pushed forward by the increasingly terrifying sandstorm, Mr. 3 made a decisive decision, raised his hand and threw out the white candle, which solidified into a giant warhammer in the air. Try this trick. Mr. 3 clenched the handle of the giant hammer with both hands, jumped up while removing the candle wall, and slammed down the core area of the sandstorm. The frantic hammer wind disrupted the operation of the sandstorm, and the yellow sand wrapped in all kinds of debris began to chaotic uncontrollably, and finally reached the limit, bursting in response. Boom. The violent impact lifted the roof of the tavern, burst the four walls of the tavern, and tore the wooden floor of the tavern. In the end, the entire tavern collapsed with a bang, submerged in the rolling yellow sand, and turned into a pile of ruins. Before the smoke cleared away, the slender and beautiful figure turned over and jumped out, standing gracefully on the street opposite the tavern. Hancock swept away the yellow sand that spread in front of him, his eyes calmly looking at the center of the smoke. Immediately after that, several figures jumped out of it, including many big men in suits headed by Das Bonus. As a result, only Crocodile and Mr. 3 were left on the field. The huge sound immediately attracted the attention of countless passers-by, and even the pirates who were entertaining in other taverns and casinos on the street ran out one after another, stunned at the tavern that had turned into ruins. Although Island C on the three-pillar roundabout does not have a navy that maintains order and law and order, it is an island where pirates gather, but because of the chaotic, disorderly, and crazy environment, no one dares to cause trouble easily. After all, you don't know when someone will stab in the back. Here are all pervasive desperados. What's the news? There's a fight over there at the Pudding Tavern. It shouldn't be. The owner of the tavern told me a few days ago that he plans to renovate. This should be the movement of the construction team, right? Idiot. Have you ever seen a renovation that demolished an entire house? In addition to the people who eat melons who are not too serious to watch the fun, there are also some brutal pirates who are just around the corner. The leader in the lead even stuck out his tongue and licked the tip of the knife, showing greed. He, that's great. It's been a long time since there has been such a movement on Island C, isn't the business here? Let this uncle come and take a good look. Who are the people who are causing trouble? If it is a famous guy on the reward order, then I can't help but secretly puff. The leader looked intently, and after recognizing the characters in the scene, the bloodthirsty expression on his face instantly collapsed. Two eyeballs burst out of their sockets at an exaggerated angle, and his mouth was wider than his face. You can clearly see the teeth popping out of the mouth, and the tongue swaying like a rattle in shock. The picture is quite strong. Hi Pirate Empress, Boya Hancock. Das Bonus of the Crocodile Society. Isn't that the one who is fighting in the thick smoke at the moment, as Crocodile? Little ones, hurry up and pack up and run away. Living in the new world with harsh living environment all the year round, this pirate leader's ability to judge the situation is naturally far superior. He can see that something is wrong at a glance, and he turns around and runs away with a group of younger brothers without any hesitation. Once you are involved in this level of battle, you will have no life if you want to escape. Seeing this group of bloodthirsty guys slip away so neatly, the other melon-eating pirates also realized that the situation was wrong and fled in all directions. The entire Sea Island town immediately fell into chaos. At this time, in the billowing smoke and dust formed after the collapse of the tavern, a crisp sound of clang-clang rang out continuously. The shock generated by the collision of the weapons continuously impacted the smoke and dust, representing the outbreak of a strong collision between the two sides, completely dissipating the smoke and dust in an instant, revealing Crocodile and Mr. 3 who were fighting fiercely inside. The dense yellow sand is flying, and the white candle weapons are endless. The tones of yellow and white replaced the thick smoke, and the chambers resisted as the people of their respective abilities collided, not giving in to each other. Mr. 1, who had retreated to the safe area, watched the fierce battle in the arena in amazement, and a solemn expression slowly surfaced in his mind. Mr. 3, this guy, actually really resisted the president's attack? Hancock on the other side folded her arms around her chest, staring at Crocodile with sharp eyes, shaking her head gently. This is just a warm-up exercise. Hancock's side just fell, and the field of yellow sand and white wax began to tilt. After holding on for a few seconds, the white wax could not resist the erosion of the yellow sand after all, and I saw Crocodile kick Mr. 3's abdomen with a fierce kick. Boom. Mr. 3 was kicked upside down by this powerful kick, and slammed into the wall of the casino where the previous pirate leader was staying. Bang bang bang. In an instant, the gravel rolled, the fragile walls and the tables, chairs, counters, etc. in the casino were smashed, and it was a mess. Relying solely on physical skills, it's still not as good as a long-established powerhouse like Lao Sha. Mr. 3 stood up slowly from the ruins, several pieces of hard candle armor fell off his abdomen, and there was a pool of soft candles on the wall behind him to offset the impact. The moment he was kicked by Crocodile, he skillfully used the ability of the candle fruit to reduce the blow to himself to a negligible level. The movement seemed to be great, but in fact he was not injured in any way. This is the advantage of giving priority to improving the accuracy of fruit ability. Thinking about the physical fitness, it should be better than the fight against Steres. Unfortunately, this body still lacks enough experience in the fast-paced confrontation. In Mr. 3's hand, he was still holding the candle giant axe that he had just fought against Crocodile. At this time, the axe blade was full of gaps. Looking up at Crocodile, who was standing in the yellow sand smoking a cigar and staring at him leisurely, the corners of Mr. 3's mouth lifted slightly involuntarily. Seems to be underestimated. What's the matter, Mr. 3? You speak so beautifully, but you only have this ability in the end? Crocodile patted the wax block on the black suit, the golden poisonous hook on his left arm was shining, and walked slowly towards Mr. 3 with a heavy sense of oppression. Not far away, Hancock looked at Mr. 3 whose chest was slightly undulating, his brows were slightly wrinkled, and the depths of his beautiful eyes were filled with doubts. Although Mr. 3's physical skills and domineering have not reached the level of Crocodile, but it was only a short warm-up exercise, why did he fall into such a weak state? Is this deliberately showing weakness to Crocodile and reducing his vigilance? Mr. 3 understands Crocodile's prudence and cunning better than I do, and should know that such a simple scheme cannot work. Then why? Suddenly, Hancock's pupils shrank, thinking of the root cause. Before that, Mr. 3, who used the fruit ability to ride a long distance on the sea, had already exhausted his physical strength and spirit. But since this is the case, why is he so eager to find Crocodile for a duel? Isn't it the best choice to rest and replenish his strength? For Mr. 3's approach, Hancock was puzzled. What is the reason for clearly wanting to recruit Crocodile by force, but putting himself at an absolute disadvantage before the battle? Could it be said that Mr. 3, this guy, still has an incredible hole card hidden? As expected of you, President, you are as strong as a monster. The candle giant axe in Mr. 3's hand melted little by little, and he met Crocodile's gaze on the surface, but in fact he was watching from side to side, looking for a convenient way to defeat the enemy. Eventually, his attention was drawn to a bucket of water in the corner of the casino. The reason why Luffy 2 years ago was able to defeat Laosha in the desert that was extremely beneficial to Laosha, aside from the protagonist's halo, is naturally the biggest key to cleverly exploiting Laosha's weakness of being afraid of water. So, you're not naive enough to want to beat me with water, are you? Crocodile saw through Mr. 3's thoughts at a glance, and said cheerfully, if you want to do it, try it out, I won't hinder you, Mr. 3. No strong man will tolerate his own fatal weakness. As early as when Alabasta was defeated by the Straw Hat, Crocodile focused on the exercise of restraining his weakness. In the past 2 years in the New World, he has completely overcome the weakness of being afraid of water, and has reached the relative perfection of fruit ability. Hearing what he said, Mr. 3's eyes narrowed slightly, and he did not doubt the authenticity of Crocodile's words. With a character of Lao Sha's level completely capable of doing such a thing, he is arrogant by nature and has no reason to bluff on his subordinates he once looked down on. If you don't give it a try, then I'll be on it. Crocodile's legs dissipated, turning into jets of yellow sand to push his body forward, and in the blink of an eye, he came to Mr. 3. And many more. Just as he was about to shoot, Mr. 3 opened his mouth and stopped him. What? Do you want to say your last words? Crocodile stopped the offensive quite cooperatively and stood still. From the beginning, he did not take Mr. 3 in his eyes. Compared to the last words, What I want to say more is the reason Ivankov mentioned about you 2 years ago in advancing the city. Mr. 3 pushed the goggles that reflected the sun's rays, and saw Crocodile on the opposite side suddenly stunned. After the relaxed expression on his face collapsed, he deliberately lowered his voice so that others would not hear, and said mysteriously. If you guessed correctly, Crocodile, before you met Ivankov who could change gender, you. Is it a daughter? Before crossing, he had seen various speculations about Crocodile's gender on One Piece. Whether it's the title, Women's Secret, in chapter 938 of the comic, Lao Sha is used as the title page cover, or Lao Sha is released on the camel of Alabasta's only female camel, there are hints in this regard, and they are right. That's why Mr. 3 came up with a temporary idea, and wanted to use this guess to test Crocodile. If the situation is true, it will be easier to handle the old sand and save a lot of unnecessary trouble. Hearing this, Crocodile was visibly stunned, then covered his forehead and raised his head, laughing loudly. Goo ha 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 ha. Is the predecessor of Lao Su a woman? Should you say that your imagination is rich, or is your brain dried by the flames above your head? Crocodile didn't shy away from his angry, laughing voice, which everyone present could hear clearly. Under the shocked and surprised gazes of Hancock and the men in black suits, including Daz Bonus, Crocodile restrained a crazy smile. Instead, his eyes quickly darkened and his tone filled with murderous intent. He hides it very well. There is both the exasperation after the secret is revealed, and the humiliation of being treated as a woman. The two are confused with each other, and it is unclear what the situation is. But what is certain is that the current Crocodile is very angry. He stepped out one step, and the dense yellow sand continued to overflow from the right arm that was hanging on his side, like a prehistoric giant crocodile in a state of rage, about to launch an attack. Desert Sword. With a loud shout, Crocodile's entire right arm was completely covered by the flowing yellow sand. The yellow sand condensed with a very high density and turned into a terrifying quicksand knife. Crocodile's figure flickered, and its speed was so fast that it was difficult to catch even with the naked eye, and appeared in front of Mr. 3 almost instantly. What the fuck? How is this different from the good one? Damn, Tieba has misunderstood me too deeply. There was no extra time to complain. Mr. 3's eyes flickered with red light, and the arrogance of seeing and hearing was elevated to the extreme at this moment. He stepped on the fluid candle on the ground, and quickly raised his arms, which were covered with domineering and high-hardness candle armor, in front of his chest. In the next second, the extremely sharp yellow sand blade hit the face. Boom. The first time it was touched, the hard and heavy candle arm was broken inch by inch. I couldn't hold it for even a second. Fortunately, the solid wax block weakened the instant explosion and subsequent power of the Desert Treasure Sword, which enabled Mr. 3's domineering arms covered with armed colors to successfully resist the blade and not be cut on the spot. Even so, the huge force transmitted from Crocodile's right arm still sent him flying, smashing through 3 walls one after another. Go to hell and repent for your words and deeds, Mr. 3. Arc Moon Sand Dunes. Unlike the first knock-up, the furious Crocodile did not intend to give Mr. 3 a chance to breathe. The yellow sand at the elbow of his right arm flowed and turned into a half-moon-shaped sand blade entirely constructed of gravel. Unlike the Desert Sword, this half-moon-shaped sand blade does not have the lethal power to cut through the enemy, but it has a more terrifying effect. As long as you touch the target's body part, you can absorb all the water in the target's body in an instant, making it a dry mummy. Crocodile's speed is too fast. Just as Mr. 3, who was knocked into the sky, stood up from the smoke and dust in the sky, the half-moon-shaped sand blade had already broken through the air and cut him in half. Haha, after all, it's still the same as before, it's a useless waste. Crocodile showed disdain, put away the sand blade and didn't even look at Mr. 3, turned around and left. He has absolute confidence in his abilities. With parallel imports like Mr. 3, there is absolutely nothing to do in the face of the erosion of yellow sand. They can only let the water in the body lose water and die slowly in despair. Eh? Just 2 steps away, Crocodile, who noticed something was wrong, stopped, rolled his eyes a little bit, and glanced behind him. I saw Mr. 3 inches behind him still maintaining a standing posture, motionless like a wooden man, and there was no sign of dehydration at all. Gollum, Gollum, Gollum. In the dense dust not far away, there was a strange sound similar to the tumbling, surging, and compression of magma. It's a pity that there is no water in the candle, my dear President Lao Sha. Mr. 3's unique voice wafted out of the billowing dust, and the Mr. 3 inches cut by the crescent-shaped sand dunes twisted and collapsed, melting into waxwater little by little. Do you create a wax figure that looks like the real thing at the moment of landing? Crocodile was shocked, and the expression on his face was calm. But in the next second, his pupils shrank suddenly, and he only felt that a crisis that was almost substantive was coming. The calm on his face also completely collapsed and shattered. Try this, President, candle, big fire. Boom. The violent impact was mixed with the scorching heat of thousands of degrees, and it suddenly exploded in Crocodile's face. With the previous experience and the slight increase obtained by cycling in Shanghai, Mr. 3 put all his strength into this candle big fire, and its destructive power is the most in history. This can be seen from the surrounding buildings that were razed to the ground. On the explosion route of the candle in the fire, a 10-meter-long, empty candle flame channel was formed. Hoo. Crocodile gasped gloomily in the mist of wax produced by the violent burning of the candle. At this time, he looked a little embarrassed. Not only was his neat and handsome black suit burned to tatters by the high temperature, but even the big cigar he was biting in his mouth was burnt clean, leaving only a black ash. The exposed upper body muscles were slightly red, and the handsome and domineering face was even more black and red. Black as cigar gray, red candle burns. Although Crocodile wanted to elementalize his body to avoid damage as soon as he sensed the danger. But he never imagined that the surface of Mr. 3's giant candle was actually covered with a layer of bubble, wrapped by the candle, which burst open before the explosion of the giant candle, soaking his whole body, making him unable to immediately enter elementalization. It is true that Crocodile did overcome the weakness of being afraid of water, but that was only when he was prepared, or caught in his vision. As long as he uses water to attack at the moment when he can't react, it will still work. He only overcame the weakness, not eliminated it. Therefore, when he heard Crocodile take the initiative to mention that he was no longer afraid of water, Mr. 3 had a preliminary trick in his heart, a preliminary plan. That is to secretly control the candles scattered on the ground, the fluid candle used to cushion the back of the pad in the candle giant axe that dropped to the ground after melting, and wrap the water in the casino bucket for use. Waiting for the perfect time to give Crocodile a fatal blow. Of course, after all, it is Crocodile, who is cautious by nature and has extremely keen fighting nerves. It is actually quite difficult to do such insidious things under his nose without being discovered. Therefore, Mr. 3 will temporarily get up and throw out the confusing question of, you are actually a daughter. If this information can be proved to be true, then there will be an additional handle of Crocodile in hand. Even if it is impossible to verify the authenticity, it can unknowingly mobilize Crocodile's emotions, making him feel unhappy or even angry, and then take the initiative to attack himself. With this trade-off, his vigilance against other places will naturally be greatly reduced, ensuring that the stealing water strategy can be successfully implemented. As a result, just as Mr. 3 planned, the candle and flamethrower with all his strength managed to hit and injure Crocodile. Showing weakness, mocking, stealing water, wax camouflage, precision strikes. Layers of routines are intertwined. In this short confrontation that was at a disadvantage at the beginning, Mr. 3 directly crushed Crocodile with his near-perfect psychological tactics and superb combat IQ. Although judging from the state of Crocodile, who is far from reaching the limit at this time, it is still quite far away from this one-on-one victory. But there is no doubt that this is the limit of what Mr. 3 can do. Very good, Mr. 3. I admit that in the past 2 years, you have not only changed your appearance and temperament. Crocodile tore off the tattered black suit on his body, revealing his muscular upper body, and his tone was extremely cold. Unexpectedly, it can hurt me like this. Mr. 3's legs were a little weak and he stood on the spot. The candle and fire breathing just now had consumed all his remaining stamina. This Laosha deserves to be an old-fashioned powerhouse who can make a few tricks with anyone. Lieutenant General Stiras can't stand eating a candle in front of him even when he uses iron and steel. After he used his face to forcibly connect, the breath exuding from his whole body was still so powerful. You fight with me with a playful mentality to pass the time, but I have the consciousness of mortal death. Isn't this kind of outcome inevitable? Although he was quite shocked in his heart, the mouthgun could not stop at all. The implication is that you asked for it yourself. Crocodile's face became even more gloomy after hearing the meaning of Mr. Three's words. So next, I will go all out with you as a real opponent. Get ready for a sandstorm, Galtino. Crocodile's eyes ignited endless fighting intent. From this moment on, the arrogant man no longer regards Mr. Three as a weak and small subordinate who can be manipulated at will, but a real powerhouse worthy of a fight. Hancock, who was standing not far away, was also full of anticipation. He wanted to see what kind of trump cards were hidden in Mr. Three, so that he had the confidence to challenge Crocodile in a tired state. Hancock has no doubts about this. After contacting her in the past 2 days, the shock and amazement brought by Mr. Three is too much. Wait a minute, let me explain something first. Just when Crocodile held up the dust storm in his hands and wanted to fight a hearty battle, Mr. Three hurriedly made a noise and raised his hand to interrupt his spellcasting. Okay. Although Crocodile was very puzzled, he still stood in place very cooperatively. Obviously, he has enough patience for Mr. Three, who has been recognized by himself. When the panting Mr. Three saw this, he immediately turned his head to look at Hancock, and shouted firmly, "Hancock, I need your cooperation. Now please raise your right hand, spread your palm, and run towards me quickly." Okay. This hidden hole card still needs the cooperation of a concubine? Hancock, who was obsessed with what kind of trump card Mr. Three was hiding, didn't think much about it, raised his hand according to Mr. Three's instructions, and ran on the street with his slender legs. At the same time, Mr. Three also raised his palm and ran towards Hancock, and the distance between the two quickly narrowed. When they were about to pass each other, Mr. Three's palm and Hancock's palm clapped together with a pop. The relay is successful, Hancock, the rest is up to you. Mr. Three, who had completed the relay perfectly, sat on the ground and gave a thumbs up to Hancock, who turned his head and looked confused, and suggested seriously, "The current Crocodile is not in good shape, take advantage of his illness to kill him. The high and low break his big back." Hearing such shameless remarks, Crocodile, who was looking forward to fighting with all his strength, couldn't hold back. Fuck your mother's Mr. Three. Even Lao Sha, who is handsome and good quality, can't care about his image and yells at him. After scolding, he looked at Hancock with gloomy eyes, and said solemnly, "Hancock, I didn't expect that you are such a person." Hancock stood there and stared blankly, the corners of his mouth twitched, his face darkened, and his body was full of visible anger. Not because of Crocodile's slightly disappointed evaluation, but because of hatred and regret. Why? You have to believe Mr. Three's nonsense, and do those stupid actions that only a childish child can do. Recalling the scene when he was running seriously on the street and completed the clapping relay with Mr. Three just now, Hancock wanted to die. She is the Emperor of Amazon Lily, the arrogant and honorable pirate empress at all times. Hancock. Crocodile still wanted to say something. To shut up. Hancock interrupted him with a mournful growl. Boom. The terrifying momentum that suddenly exploded turned into a hurricane, which made her clothes flutter, and her long black head danced wildly, like a goddess. Boom. Hancock stepped out and smashed the ground. Crocodile, be careful, the concubine is now extremely angry. 2 against 1, is this what you mean by heads up? Galtino. Crocodile was furious and shouted at Mr. Three, who was resting on the ground. The main reason is not that Hancock's sudden burst of breath is full of oppression, but that he can't stand it. Mr. Three, whom he just agreed with, is still as sinister and cunning as he was 2 years ago, and he is greedy for life and fear of death. It's not 1-on-2, Lao Sha, I'm taking the initiative to admit defeat. You won the heads up. Mr. Three sat leisurely where he was, without the slightest word to anger the 2 Qiwuhai queens. There is a little bit of success. That's why it's Hancock's turn to fight with you. Don't worry, I won't interfere in the battle between you. Let your mother's heart go. This is the second time Crocodile has swears in disregard of his image. If he hadn't paid most of his attention to Hancock, who could attack at any time, he would have really wanted to suck up Mr. Three himself and throw it into the sea to feed the fish. Seeing Crocodile so excited, Mr. Three simply chose to ignore him and turned his head to look elsewhere. Deep down, I was secretly happy. Because of this hard-to-get first battle, he perfectly achieved his goal: to eliminate the relationship between his superiors and subordinates that was hidden in Crocodile's subconsciousness. This is very important, after all, with Laosha's temperament higher than the sky, it is simply impossible for him to join the Bucky pirates and bend himself under Mr. 3, who is the second in command. Even both sides of the same level are not what he can tolerate. Therefore, it is necessary to make Crocodile recognize the strength of Mr. 3 and regard it as a strong opponent to pave the way for subsequent recruitment. The hard-to-get strategy is simple to say, but the actual steps and planning are very particular, not only to destroy Crocodile's body, but also to obliterate his arrogant consciousness. If you casually abuse Crocodile a few times, you can successfully recruit him. Then there are many people in this sea who can easily do this kind of thing. Recruitment. Pay attention to the word, recruit, pay attention to the method of layer upon layer. This is the same as picking up girls. If you show off your personality, preferences, interests, and size with sister paper as soon as you come up, sister paper will only think that you are stupid and too straightforward. On the contrary, by throwing out these advantages of one's own in mutual communication, little by little, and amazed little by little, you can arouse the emotions and attention of the other party while ensuring the sense of mystery, so that you can unknowingly bring your own. The image penetrates into her subconscious, and then completes the strategy. For the same reason, this is also the fundamental reason why Mr. 3, despite his physical exhaustion, also launched a duel against Crocodile. From the very beginning, he had no intention of revealing all his cards in the first battle. Including the combat power in full state, including the big move Candle Purgatory, and including the Overlord domineering and domineering enough to terrify Laosha, etc. Because, in the next few battles, he will slowly surprise Lao Sha, nibble away his unruly arrogance a little bit, and attack him. In a word, the heart of playing tactics is dirty. Seeing Mr. 3 ignoring his actions, Crocodile gritted his teeth in anger, but he could do nothing. A rather terrifying monster was standing in front of him. President, let's do it. Daz Bonus, who was standing by the side to watch the battle, joined the battlefield and blocked in front of Crocodile with a group of boys in black suits. Before Crocodile could speak, he heard a loud hum, and the dark red lightning suddenly exploded from the opposite Hancock. The tyrannical domineering arrogance like a beast in the abyss swept the audience with an unparalleled domineering attitude. Plop, plop, plop. The black suits who came out and walked through the scene all turned white, fell to the ground one after another, and completely lost consciousness in Hancock's domineering. Even Daz Bonus, who was standing in the center, had to turn his whole body into a sharp blade, and use his sharp fruit ability to increase his courage to resist the tyrannical domineering. Although he resisted reluctantly, Daz Bonus's tough guy face was already covered in cold sweat at this moment. This is the horror of the domineering of the Overlord. It can instantly kill the weak soldiers, and it can also cause a psychological deterrence that is difficult to calm down in a short period of time. Hancock. Forget the guy who doesn't want a face in Galtino. I didn't expect that even you are such a person who takes advantage of others. Crocodile stepped forward slowly, looking at Hancock with disdain in his eyes. Then, in front of him, who was so disdainful, flew a fragrant foot with great force. Boom. The domineering kick wrapped in high-level armament kicked Crocodile's handsome face into shape, and then an incomparably heavy violence poured out, kicking Crocodile violently, knocking down an entire street of buildings one after another. What gave you the illusion that your concubine is an upright person? I'm a pirate, and... After kicking Crocodile with a kick, Hancock raised his hand and brushed away the hair that fell on his forehead, his eyes drooping. Unbelievably beautiful. My concubine is as beautiful as a god. No matter what I do, I will be forgiven. Daz Bonus stared blankly at the stunning sight in front of him, and his heartbeat couldn't help racing. After a few seconds, he reacted suddenly, his expression changed drastically, and he quickly pulled away. President. He wanted to rush over to check the status of his president, but was stopped by a steady magnetic voice. Daz, leave Hancock to me. You go to the damn Galtino to settle the account. Looking up, I saw Crocodile slowly standing up from the ruins. After moving his jaws and adjusting the dislocated joints, he stared at Hancock coldly. Daz Bonus opened his mouth slightly, and was a little worried about the president's situation, but after thinking about the pros and cons, he responded in a deep voice. Understood. In the 2 years in the New World, he has deeply realized his own weakness, and it is not realistic to forcibly stop Hancock, who is fierce and charming, and can't help much. In this case, it is better to take the opportunity to win Mr. 3, use it as a bargaining chip to reverse the disadvantaged situation, and then force Hancock back. When Mr. 3, who was resting not far away, heard it, he immediately wanted to laugh. What they are facing is Hancock, who is at his peak. Can he let Mr. 1 come over so easily? A mere Mr. 1, it's not Hancock's kick. What the hell? Suddenly, the calm and confident expression on Mr. 3's face collapsed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and 2 eyeballs jumped out of their sockets in extreme shock. What the hell? What the fuck? Why? Hancock ignored Mr. 1 at all and just watched him come over. Looking at Das Bonus, who was swaggering towards him, Mr. 3's mouth twitched, and his whole body felt bad for a moment. Now he doesn't have a drop of it, he's going to fight Das Bonus, who ate the quick-cut fruit with his head. How dare you let your concubine do such shameful things? Go to hell with your duty. Seeing Mr. 3's unbelievably flustered appearance, Hancock clapped his hands, feeling more invigorated. The Pirate Queen is quite vengeful. Looking at Das Bonus, whose arms turned into blades, Mr. 3 deeply realized that Hancock really didn't intend to intervene. Damn it, it would have been better if I had known that it was not skinned. Mr. 3 felt remorse in his heart, although he was quite aware that Das Bonus could not kill him, but the result did not represent the process. He was very likely to be severely beaten. Brother 1, don't be impulsive. Don't you forget the friendship we used to run an exercise together with Mr. 2 under the sunset in Alabasta? In order to delay time, and to make himself suffer less from flesh and blood, Mr. 3 frantically searched for the memory of his original body about Das Bonus, and played emotional cards. Waiting for the woman who noticed the strange situation to come to the rescue. However, the emotional card is of no use to the tough guy Das Bonus. Gardino, I haven't used the name Mr. 1 for a long time. Das Bonus's voice was cold and ruthless, and the pace of progress did not stop. Once your hand knife got rusted, I was the one who removed the rust for you. Brother 1. Let's sit down quietly and chat for a while, let's catch up. Mr. 3 was still trying to shake. Das Bonus remained unmoved, slowly raised his arms that turned into sharp blades, and placed them in a cross shape on his chest, and said solemnly, Stop talking nonsense, you beat the president and used Hancock with him. Shameless wheel battle, just. Obviously die. After all, he is a character who doesn't talk much. Das Bonus, who is in a good position, quickened his pace, rushed to Mr. 3's eyes at the moment when the voice fell, and slashed 2 fierce cross-cuts. Cut and cut. Candle wall. The unavoidable Mr. 3 could only forcefully squeeze his stamina, raising his hand to create a hard wall of candles in front of him. Boom. The powerful slash cut in the center of the candle wall, and the wax shavings flew in an instant, leaving 2 cross-cuts nearly 10 centimeters deep on it. Fuck. Mr. 1, you bastard, you really want to kill me, right? Looking at the candle wall that was almost cut into several pieces, Mr. 3 froze. Aren't you okay? Das Bonus's answer indirectly denied Mr. 3's statement. As a former companion, he thought he knew something about Mr. 3. If he was hacked to death so easily, why would he be the second in command of Qiwuhai? Only, Das Bonus looked suspiciously at Mr. 3, who was retreating frantically. When this guy fought with the president just now, he didn't get hurt much. Why does he look so weak now? Is it because the candle fire fist with amazing lethality exhausted his stamina? Das Bonus shook his head lightly, put aside the question he didn't understand for a while, and continued to move towards Mr. 3. For whatever reason, his top priority right now is to fulfill the president's order and capture Mr. 3 alive. Click, click, click. There was a sound of blades rubbing against Das Bonus's right arm. Looking closely, the original flesh and skin had turned into several high-speed rotating blades, as terrifying as a meat grinder. Try this trick, spiral cut. The arm meat grinder tore open the air and attacked Mr. 3 at an extremely tricky angle. A red light flashed in Mr. 3's eyes, he saw and heard, and he swayed his body to avoid the oncoming spinning slash. Boom. The aftermath of the attack bombarded the building wall behind him, leaving a large hole with neat cuts. As soon as the hit was missed, the expression on Das Bonus's face did not fluctuate, and he raised another arm, which was also covered with high-speed rotating blades, and attacked again. Mr. 3 was unable to touch head-to-head, so he could only drag his weak body and retreated again and again with the help of various buildings along the way. Das Bonus was pressing step by step, without giving Mr. 3 a chance to breathe. Finally, a solid and hard touch came from Mr. 3's back. he was forced to the corner of the alleyway that could not be avoided. It's time to end this boring peekaboo farce, Galtino. Dasbonus looked at Mr. 3 with cold eyes, and raised his right arm that turned into a slender blade. The figure 3 hairstyle on Mr. 3's head swiftly burst out a few small flames. After several attempts, he still did not have the physical strength to create a candle. Damn it, do you have to use your body to take this knife? At the moment of despair, the goggles on Mr. 3's nose suddenly reflected light, vaguely reflecting the dark light on the building above. It can be counted. I saw that Mr. 3 changed his previous awkward appearance, raised his chest, and took the initiative to open his arms, exposing his chest to the blade of Dasbonus. What do you mean? Dasbonus asked suspiciously. The corner of Mr. 3's mouth raised slightly. The scar on the back is. Originally wanted to learn from Suoda's terribly handsome speech, but when he said it, he realized later that he was not a famous swordsman. Well, Grandma has legs and failed to pretend. Looking at Mr. 3, who stopped abruptly in the middle of the conversation, Dasbonus no longer delayed, raised his arm and slashed with a sharp blade. He needs to incapacitate Mr. 3 ASAP, black wheel slash. Just when the hand knife was about to touch Mr. 3, along with the angry female voice, a black knife light fell from the sky. What? Dasbonus's pupils shrank suddenly, and he caught a strong sense of danger. He immediately retracted his chopped right arm, and crossed it with his left arm above his head. Boom. Almost at the same time, the black knife light galloped along the walls of the buildings on both sides of the alley, turning into a fiery red short-haired beauty in a dark style. Ayasha's original blue eyes have now turned into deep black. She came directly above Dasbonus in a blink of an eye, holding the long knife filled with thick black mist in her hands. Mioman's figure rotated at a high speed with the inertia brought by the rapidity, and pulled out a pitch-black rotating slash. Crazy slashing at Dasbonus, who was in a defensive stance. Bang 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 bang. In the pervasive black mist, the fireworks generated by the collision of the swords were frantically sputtered. In just an instant, Dasbonus's calm face changed drastically. The heavy pressure that was continuously transmitted from the black blade almost cut off his steel-like arms. After all, he has quite a lot of combat experience with swordsmen, and Dasbonus, who had calmed down, raised his right leg, which turned into a sharp blade, and cut it to Ayasha's abdomen. Ayasha reacted quickly and slashed to the side. Driven by the reverse impact force, she avoided this sharp slash. Dasbonus chased after the victory, seized the momentary gap, raised his sharp blade arm and cut it down. Clang. Ayasha blocked the blow with a knife in her hand, and used downward force to release the stagnant state and landed. She flashed her knife and quickly swung the knife to launch a crazy attack on Dasbonus. Dasbonus also did not give in. The ability to quickly cut the fruit was completely released, and the whole body was transformed into a sharp blade, responding with overwhelming slashing. Clang 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 clang. The dazzling high-speed slashes collided with each other, and the two of them increased their speed to the extreme, reaching a level that was difficult to catch with the naked eye. With the particularity of the fruit's ability, Dasbonus, who is covered in blades, has an absolute advantage in this confrontation. In just a few seconds, bloodstains of different shades were left on Ayasha's hands, feet, abdomen, etc. Just when Dasbonus was full of confidence and wanted to take down the opponent just like that, suddenly, he felt that his fighting spirit was rapidly declining, and even the speed of his knife was stagnant. Malicious bondage. At this moment, pitch-black viscous smoke gushes out from Ayasha's body, turning into countless black chains and attacking Dasbonus. She used her fruit ability. The jet-black chains attacked Daz, who had never been able to escape, and bound his hands and feet into blades. What? Daz was taken aback. As a person with the ability to cut fruit quickly, what he fears most is the hands and feet that are bound to support his actions. Under normal circumstances, no one dares to touch the sharp blade head-on. And why would I involuntarily let down my guard against this woman who suddenly appeared? Daz raised his head to look at the short-haired beauty who raised his knife and slashed at him, frowning. Under normal circumstances, he should be able to avoid a chain of black mist at that speed. However, no matter what he said, in this only a few seconds of confrontation, he was indeed at a disadvantage. How dare you do such an excessive thing to Brother 3 and my idol? Ayasha held the long knife in her hand tightly, her shoulders trembled slightly from excessive anger, Her eyes were extremely cold, unforgivable, absolutely unforgivable. I am going to kill you. She held up the long sword shrouded in black mist and sprinted quickly, and slashed heavily towards Daz, who was restrained from moving. It's sizzling. Where the black sharp blade crossed, bright red blood splashed out. The aftermath of the powerful slash sent Daz flying, stepping on the ground with his legs on the ground and sliding for a distance of more than 10 meters before barely stopping. A fruit-capable person. Daz, who stood firm, lowered his head slightly, his eyes moved. I saw that on my chest, which was as hard as steel, blood was constantly spilling out from a hideous knife mark. The knife caused him a lot of trauma. If at that moment, he hadn't covered the armed and domineering resistance in time, he would have been lying on the ground by now. However, compared to this injury, what shocked Daz more were the words of the female swordsman. Such a sexy and beautiful beauty, to call this guy Mr. 3. An idol? Are you willing to fight me in that desperate way for him? Looking up at Mr. 3, whose appearance and temperament had improved, but still had the same facial contours and peculiar hairstyle, Daz's eyes were full of disbelief and envy. He felt that his worldview was gradually collapsing. Also confused, there is Mr. 3. Although I know that Ayasha, who is the commissioner of Bucky Express, must be very fierce, but it is really difficult to connect this one. I would rather be injured than to face the ruthless man who is slashing with Daz, and to connect with the docile classmate I in the conference room. Also, what the hell is an idol? Mr. 3 searched hard for the memory of the original owner, but there was no memory of Ayasha at all. Boom. Before Mr. 3 and Daz could figure out the situation from their doubts, there was a sudden loud noise of buildings collapsing and destroying one after another in the distance. Looking up, I saw that the entire land was eroded by the yellow sand, and the houses and shops standing on the streets were like building blocks, sinking little by little on the desert-turned land, annihilating into tiny dust. In the desert, the two figures in the extremely fast speed collided with each other, stirring up the black lightning that exploded after the debut, and the space oscillated, and the yellow sand flew wildly. That's the president's erosion cycle. Daz stood there, staring blankly at Crocodile, who was constantly suppressed by the pirate queen Hancock in the desert. His eyebrows were furrowed, his eyes full of worry. The president's physical skills are already weaker than Hancock's, and a lot of stamina has been consumed by Mr. 3. If even the full liberation of fruit ability cannot reverse the situation, then the result can be imagined. Gotta get the Mr. 3 quickly. Daz, who knew that time was short, slowly raised his head and stared at the woman in black who blocked Mr. 3 behind him. His muscles were twisted and swelled, and a black blade covered with a domineering armed color appeared. Those sharp eyes seemed to be transformed into substantial slashes at this moment, constantly blooming in all directions. Mr. 3's eyes narrowed and turned away subconsciously. Just looking at Daz, I can feel a sting in my eyes, as if it was really cut by a knife. Ayasha, be careful. He reminded Ayasha, who was standing in front. Hearing this, Ayasha, who was holding a pitch-black long sword, trembled, and when she turned back, the sassy style of murderous intent suddenly changed, filled with an extremely bright smile. Yeah. Knowing Brother 3, I will definitely listen to you and chop off his head into pieces. Mr. 3. There are too many grooves, I don't know where to start. Looking at Ayasha's rather wrong appearance, he really wanted to ask immediately what was going on. Wouldn't it be a story about a cold-blooded and ruthless female killer who saw Mr. 3 in the newspaper, felt a strong sense of admiration, and then resolutely went to sea to pursue her idol? It's a pity that Daz on the opposite side didn't intend to give Mr. 3 time to ask questions. After the ultimate move was finished, he, who was covered in blades, slightly arched his body, like a crouching beast that was about to attack. Thousands of knives flow, everything is cut. Daz's breath suddenly burst, just as he was about to attack. Suddenly, an embarrassed figure flew upside down from the desert, hitting the ground near Daz with a bang. The billowing smoke from the impact dissipated with the wind, revealing Crocodile lying flat in the deep pit in the shape of a big shape, covered in injuries. Unexpectedly faster than Daz, he still lost to Hancock's long legs. President. Daz immediately lost his will to continue fighting, and after releasing the tension in his body, he quickly rushed to where Crocodile was. However, such a serious mistake is undoubtedly extremely fatal in a battle of the same level. Whoosh. The black shadow flashed in an instant, and reflected in Daz's huge pupils was Ayasha, who was slightly bent over and slashed with energy. The inky black eyes released endless killing intent. She really wants to cut off the enemy's head. Wait a minute, Ayasha. Mr. 3, who felt bad, said quickly, and hurriedly stopped. It's sizzling. Although Ayasha closed the knife at the first time, but due to the excessive inertia, it was not completely closed. In an instant, blood splattered, and Daz's abdomen to the chest was incised with bloodstains of nearly 1 meter. Daz was hit hard, blood spilled from the corner of his mouth, and he fell to the ground on one knee. Call. Seeing this, Mr. 3 could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. In her heart, she secretly thought that this girl, Ayasha, lived in a bloody and cruel mercenary organization. At the same time, Hancock, whose clothes were slightly dirty, walked slowly from the rapidly disintegrating yellow sand. Seeing Mr. 3, who was unscathed, and Daz Bonus kneeling on one knee, there was a clear look of surprise in her eyes. Huh. Mr. 3, why aren't you dead yet? Thanks to you. Mr. 3 replied with gratefulness on his face, and then said, then, let's proceed as planned. After glancing at Crocodile lying in the giant pit with a large font, Mr. 3 winked at Hancock and Ayasha, indicating that they had achieved their goal and could leave. Ayasha, who is a loyal fan, doesn't need to say much, but after some hesitation, Hancock finally gave up his plan to take revenge on Mr. 3 by himself, and silently followed the two and left. In the huge pit, Crocodile, whose big back and head were scattered, did not have any energy to perceive their departure, but just lay on the ground with his eyes closed and waited for death. Hee hee, Boyahan Cook, if I'm at the peak, how can I be bullied by you so much? And Mr. 3, although I don't know what your purpose is for you to come to me, but the winner is the king and the loser, come on, just follow your plan. Since you want the head of Lao Su so much, just take it. If Lao Su blinks his eyes, he won't be called Crocodile. In the words, Lao Sha's arrogance, fearlessness and determination to face death are fully displayed. Swoosh, a gust of wind blew, and apart from a little embarrassment, nothing happened. After a few seconds of silence, Daz, who was seriously injured, vomited blood, and said with difficulty, President, they are all gone. Crocodile, who was ready to meet death, suddenly opened his eyes. Gone? Ah. No trace of other plans? Ah. The three just ran over and beat me up. Judging from the results, it seems so. Grass. 3 pillars roundabout, Island C, the west side of the town that was not affected by the battle between Hancock and Crocodile. It belongs to the temporary combat headquarters of the Bucky Express Mercenary Corps. As the main action personnel of this operation, Mr. 3, Hancock and Ayasha sat at the conference table and discussed the specific steps of the second battle of Hard to Play. To say it is a discussion, in fact, is Mr. 3 himself saying that Hancock only occasionally raises a few questions. As for Ayasha, she changed back to Miyoshi again, lowered her head and concentrated on taking notes. The purpose of the first battle is only to eliminate the grudge in Lao Sha's heart for me, who used to be a subordinate, without using all his cards. In this case, he will feel that I just used your strength, Hancock, or that we used the wheel battle to defeat him, and he is very unconvinced. This is a defeat. Mr. 3, who was sitting in the main seat, took a sip of the coffee on the table, and after secretly thinking that Nima was really bitter, he continued, in the next second battle, I will do my best and use my strength to completely crush Lao Sha. Of this idea. The huge psychological gap before and after can leave an indelible shock in the depths of his unruly heart. This is a heart attack. And when Lao Sha's body and mind are torn apart, the third battle will be enough to completely subdue him. Listening to Mr. 3's detailed planning, Hancock only felt that his eyes were suddenly enlightened. She immediately figured out why Mr. 3 had to drag his tired body to fight Crocodile one-on-one. This is to show the enemy's weakness and to pave the way for the psychological attack that follows. And many more. Hancock looked up at Mr. 3, who had a calm face, and there was a vague shock in his flawless eyes. Could it be that, as early as in Kalai Bali, this guy had already thought of a plan and deliberately chose a physically intensive way of moving, such as a sea-bike, so as to achieve the purpose of weakening himself? He even calculated himself. The more Hancock thought about it, the more frightened he became. Mr. 3 and his pupils became more and more unfathomable. Although there was a little accident in the middle, the first battle of beating Lao Sha was successfully completed. The accident with the middle finger of Mr. Three's mouth was naturally due to the fact that he almost got himself cut off because of a whim. That is to say, you just need to wait quietly for recovery, and then continue to beat Crocodile? Hancock asked. Yes. Understood. Hancock nodded lightly. She is no longer skeptical about Mr. Three's arrangement. After this battle, the arrogant pirate empress finally reluctantly accepted the reality. She and Mr. Three's minds are not on the same level at all. Mr. Three slowly picked up the coffee in front of him and took another sip in disbelief. Well, it's still painful. This sip can be regarded as a complete break from his thoughts about coffee. After placing it directly in the distance, he looked at Ayasha, who was lowering his head to take notes. Speaking of which, Ayasha. After the business is finished, the next step is naturally to satisfy curiosity. He really wanted to know why a fierce and strong beauty like Ayasha would regard Mr. Three in the original book as an idol and stay firm. Ah. Yes. Hearing Brother Three suddenly calling out his name, Ayasha jumped up from the seat, bowed 90 degrees and apologized. I'm sorry, Brother Three. Next time I meet that bald man, I will definitely cut off his head. Mr. Three. Why are you still struggling with this kind of thing? No, you should be able to clearly feel that he didn't mean to kill me, right? Hearing this, Ayasha frowned, her blue eyes flashed with a firm look, and she said, of course. So what? It's not an exaggeration to die 100 times for those who dare to hurt Brother Three. Cough. Our ultimate goal is to recruit. Looking at such a radical short-haired beauty, Mr. Three felt a headache. True fans are sometimes really hard to deal with. After briefly sorting out his thoughts, he explained to Ayasha the serious consequences of killing Daz. Oh, that's right. Ayasha nodded heavily as if listening. Seeing this, Mr. Three was also relieved. Then next time we meet, just chop off his hands and feet. Mr. Three. It's not my sister. How did your brain circuit get into the position of the special commissioner in the complex and sinister mercenary group? After thinking of Ayasha's fruit ability, Mr. Three was relieved. In the mercenary group of all villains, her fruit ability is indeed a bit buggy. You listen carefully to Ayasha, unless the other party also kills you, otherwise, try not to leave incurable wounds on the people of Crocodile. Mr. Three solemnly explained to Ayasha. Oh, good. Ayasha froze for a moment, then nodded. Seeing that she agreed so readily, Mr. Three breathed a sigh of relief, and after pondering for a few seconds, he still asked the question he wanted to know the most. So, Ayasha, why do you regard me as an idol? As soon as these words came out, Hancock, who was sitting quietly eating melons not far away, suddenly raised his eyebrows, leaned forward, and pricked up his ears quietly. After that, Brother Three, can you send me a signature sealed with a candle? Ayasha tried to say. No problem. Mr. Three readily agreed. Really? That's great. Ayasha's pretty face bloomed with a smile that was brighter than the sun. After briefly sorting out her emotions, her eyes darkened again as she recalled the bad memories. Then he slowly opened his mouth and told Mr. Three and the eavesdropping Hancock about his childhood experiences. That is the story of a bad old man, who took office as a wax fruit person, and a little girl called a monster, moving to the sidelines. At the same time, it was quite far from the Three Pillars roundabout, an island in the New World. At the dimly lit negotiating table, Bucky and Miss Bajan sat opposite each other. Behind Bucky is a group of ferocious and brutal pirates, and behind Miss Bajan stands a huge Edward Wable with a knife. The short Ba Jhin has a thick lip blush on his mouth, a wrinkled face, and a leopard print coat on his back. I saw her raised her hand and slapped the table heavily, and the stars were flying in her mouth. 20 points, Bucky, this is my bottom line, otherwise, no matter how much you say, my mother will not agree to recruit. On the opposite side, Bucky took the handkerchief that his subordinates thoughtfully handed over, and with a gloomy face, he wiped the stinky saliva on his face with graceful movements. Then he put down the handkerchief, his chest swelled a little, and after brewing a good mood, saliva, he cursed. Smelly old woman, you are thinking of farting. Give back 20.00% of the total income of the Bucky Pirates. I suggest you fuck directly. Wouldn't it be better to go to the Navy headquarters to grab money? The overwhelming saliva flew across the sky, spraying the unsuspecting Miss Ba Jhin on his face. In the end, it is the great god Bucky, who perfectly interprets what is called, Shicibukai, ahem, what as, the grace of dripping water is reciprocated by the spring. It was originally just a simple war of words, but in the eyes of the younger brothers behind him, it was quite powerful and domineering. Bah! Captain Bucky, he didn't give that Miss Ba Jin face at all, even if the person standing behind him was Whitebeard too, who cut off the arm of the former Admiral Black Wrist Zephyr. He was still arrogant and domineering. Whitebeard too defeated Zephyr, and Captain Bucky ignored Whitebeard too, which means, hiss. Captain Bucky, completely disregarding the Admiral? The eyes of the younger brothers flashed golden light, and their breathing became rapid. If it is not necessary to maintain the serious atmosphere at the moment, these brain supplement monsters will definitely raise their hands and shout the name of God Bucky. Hee, Bucky, I thought you were a smart guy when you first came to me. Miss Bajan raised her hand to wipe off the drool on her face, and said gloomily, but if you have this attitude, then today's matter will be difficult to handle. It's hard to do. Then the fuck. Bucky laughed and put his hands under the table. The funny clown's face showed a wicked look. See this. From some magical location, he pulled out a page titled Suicide Note, and a tiny phone bug with a video playback function. This is. Miss Ba Jin probed, and after seeing the contents of the suicide note in Bucky's hand, his face changed greatly. What Bucky showed to Miss Bajan was naturally the suicide note written by Whitebeard. This is a false suicide note prepared by Mr. 3 in advance. The general content is, let his son Wabel obey the instructions of his best friend Bucky unconditionally, and at the same time, he must stay away from the bad old woman Miss Bajan. She is not his wife at all. This kind of thing just sounds quite absurd, and it is impossible for normal people to believe it, or to investigate the authenticity of the suicide note. But the simple-minded Bai or Shi is not necessarily, he is even willing to listen to the words of Miss Ba Jin and start action. At the same time, in order to convince Bai 2 of the content of the suicide note, Mr. 3 also specially brought in to fight the war. Whitebeard requested a live video of the Navy joining forces with Bucky to create the illusion that Bucky and Whitebeard were true friends. Of course, it is not ruled out that this suicide note and the video recording will not shake the situation of Bai or Shi. Therefore, the most important role of these two things is to restrain Miss Bajan, a cunning and greedy woman. She was afraid of using Bai 2 as a tool to make a fortune, so she had to accept recruitment and cooperation. That is to say, until the two sides completely tear their faces, Bai or Shi will not see the suicide note and video. This is one of the 36 tricks, creating something out of nothing. Old woman. What do you say? I think we can talk about points again. Seeing Miss Ba Jin's quickly darkened old face, Bucky nodded with satisfaction, quickly took back the suicide note and the video phone bug, and let out a smirk. Miss Bajan is a very smart person. I believe that after seeing these two things, she can definitely understand the advantages and disadvantages of them. Accepting the recruitment, she can still get enough money by virtue of Bai or Shi. If she doesn't accept it, she is very likely to lose an important cash cow, and even her life is explained here. Damn Bucky, are you threatening the old lady? Miss Bajan's face was tight, and the eyes under the sunglasses were burning with endless anger. No, how can you think so? Bucky, who had the handle in his hand, looked very arrogant, and said cheaply, we are mutually beneficial and win-win, and there is no benefit. This uncle will not do it. You. Miss Bajan slapped the table violently, took a few deep breaths to calm down, and finally made a concession. Tell me, after joining you, how much can I get? Hearing this, Bucky slowly stretched out a finger. Okay. 10 o'clock is 10 o'clock, Miss was furious. But never thought about it. Bucky stroked his chin and said insatiably, no, I mean a point. What a joke, as a clown Bucky who regards money as his life, how could he give the money he earned to outsiders for nothing? What's more, he is still holding the opponent's handle in his hand, and if he can give a point, he will be considered a great compassion. What did you say? Miss Ba Jin couldn't believe his ears. Isn't this uncle not clear enough? 1 point is 1%. Bucky was still arrogant. Ha. After confirming that he heard correctly, Miss Ba Jin laughed loudly, and the harsh sound resounded through this uninhabited island. After laughing, Miss Ba Jin slowly stood up, raised her vicious eyes and stared straight at Bucky. Because she was wearing black sunglasses, Bucky didn't know the strong murderous intent wrapped in his old eyes, and thought the old woman was angry and helpless. So he said kindly, "Forget it, you are so pitiful, I'll give you 1 or 5 points, this is my biggest concession." In response to him, Mrs. extremely cold words. "I have a better idea now than this. What do you think? After joining the Bucky Pirates, you can be considered a partner. If it's not too much, I can agree. Leave all of you on this island." "Ah, it's totally unnecessary for us to eat on the island, I have to." As he spoke, Bucky, who had a long reflex arc, finally sensed the murderous intent in Miss Bajan's words. His arrogant expression changed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and his eyeballs protruded a little. "Weibo." Miss Bajan's eyes were stern, and she quickly hid behind the tall and majestic Bai-Ershi, with a grim expression on her face, and gave an order, "Kill them all, not a single one is left." "I know, Mom." The cute and honest Bai-Ershi suddenly became excited, released a strong and superb arm domineering, and rendered the guandao clenched in his hand into a pitch-black color. The aura of the whole person skyrocketed wildly, like a bloodthirsty beast. He couldn't see the specific content of the suicide note, and couldn't understand the conversation between his mother and Bucky, but as long as his mother had an order, he would follow it through without hesitation. Huh. On the opposite side, seeing Bai Tu quickly posing an offensive posture, Bucky was frightened to pieces. Don't worry, it's okay if you're not satisfied with the price." Before the words were finished, Bai-Ershi's fierce slash, which was covered with high-level armed arrogance, slashed sharply. Boom. The force of the explosion smashed the negotiating table into powder along the way, and the slash with the spark arc was accurate. Through the gap between Bucky's body, which was just split apart. Boom. The diagonally upward slash whizzed past, directly blowing the distant mountain to smithereens. Bai-Ershi's blow is terrifying. The younger brothers behind Bucky saw that Bai Tu was so mighty. Not only did they not feel afraid, but their faces were even full of admiration. Before Bai-Ershi even launched an attack, he split his body in advance and avoided the slash at an incomparably subtle angle. Hey, is this Captain Bucky's arrogance? Sure enough, he has practice to the point of foreseeing the future. As expected of a man I am ashamed of, Captain Bucky's strength is so terrifying. Come on, Captain Bucky, let that foolish big man see your power. The boys went crazy, shouting the name of Bucky the Clown. Such unbridled and mighty momentum also stunned Bai-Ershi and Miss Ba-Jin on the opposite side. Mom, this guy's knowledge is so powerful. Weibo stared at Bucky tightly and couldn't help sighing. It's more powerful than anything we've met before. Hearing the words, the furious Miss jumped up, raised her slap and slapped it on Bai-Ershi's knee, shouting, "Isn't this nonsense? If there is another choice, I don't want to fight against this legendary man. The enemy is very strong, you should be serious with my mother." Weibo stood there blankly, as if he hadn't heard. "Where is the old lady talking to you? Did you hear me?" "I heard, but Mom, they..." Weibo blinked his round eyes, stretched out his fingers and pointed forward. "It seems to be running away." Miss Ba-Jin was startled, looked up, and saw that Bucky's group had already fled and ran 100 meters away. "Want to run it this time? Weibo, chase after me." Although she doesn't know what Bucky's plan is, since the other party has taken out suicide notes and videos to threaten, no matter what, she can't just let them go. "Yes, Mom." Weibo charged his legs, bursting out with astonishing strength, and chasing after him with the guandao. At the same time, Bucky and his gang were running ahead. "Bah, Captain Bucky, why didn't you screw that Weibo's head off? That is to say, it's not like you can't beat that stupid big guy. Why do you want to escape? Ahem, you have to retreat strategically?" The faces of the running younger brothers were full of doubts. In their perception, Captain Bucky should rush up and beat the second world up. Could it be that Captain Bucky is actually not as strong as they thought, a coward? How could Bucky, who was running for his life, take care of answering the doubts of the younger brothers? At this moment, he could not wait to use both hands and feet, and quickly escape from the pursuit range of Bai Tu. "Damn, Mr. 3, you said that 36 tricks made out of nothing have a very high success rate. Where is the fucking high?" Bucky was madly drawing circles at Mr. 3. Little did he know that it was his stubbornness that caused this situation. Of course, there are also reasons for Miss Ba Jin's insatiable greed. The group of people had mixed feelings in their hearts, but the movements on their legs and feet were not ambiguous at all, and they ran out of afterimages. After all, it was a team with an average bounty of hundreds of millions. In the end, on the edge of the offshore beach of the island, they were caught up by the furious White Two. Hey, where else do you want to escape? Bai Ershi licked his lips bloodthirsty. He raised the knife in his hand, just as he was about to slash at the chaotic Bucky crowd. On the coastline in the distance, a dilapidated boat the size of a wooden board with green candles lit on both sides suddenly approached. Whoosh! On the boat, the black long knife slid lightly. In an instant, the sky and the earth were eclipsed, and an emerald green supreme slash, carrying the power of destroying the sky and destroying the earth, attacked Bai Ershi, who was slashed with a knife. Although Bai Ershi reacted quickly and blocked the sword in front of him, he was still unable to resist the subsequent outbreak of the slash, and the whole person was pushed out for hundreds of kilometers. On the coastline, the handsome and strong man slowly put away the crossed black knife, got off the boat and came to Bucky and the others. The younger brothers looked at it, and immediately their eyes popped out of their sockets in shock, and tremblingly said the name of the person who came. Eagle Hawkeye. After the shock, they, who were all very smart, began to make up their minds one after another. If I read it right, he just shot and helped us repel Bai Tu? Could it be that? Could it be that Captain Bucky already knew that Hawkeye would appear in this place, so he deliberately brought Bai Tu here? Captain Bucky, he can actually command the world's #1 swordsman? What's more, he covered his face and cried bitterly on the spot. Captain Bucky, I was wrong. I was so wrong. I doubted your strength just now. No wonder you didn't say a word along the way. Surely, you must be deeply saddened by our mistrust and understanding. Sad that you are a spiral explosion head. I didn't say a word, I just didn't want to waste time running for my life. Bucky complained frantically in his heart, but his surface was as steady as an old dog, and he sighed silently with his hands behind his back. Oh, you, forget it, oh. As soon as these words came out, the younger brothers cried even more, and the tears flowed out like a dike burst. Taking advantage of the gap between their distractions, Bucky dodged and came to Hawkeye's side in an instant. Yo, Hawkeye, Saxi ignores Daw. A group of idiots. At this time, it must be safer to hide next to the world's #1 swordsman. I didn't expect to meet you in a place like this, Bucky. Hawkeye's voice was steady and low. Thinking of the Navy who kept chasing after him, he looked at Bucky and the gang of young brothers with good fighting power. A strange light flashed through the sharp pupils of Hawkeye's tireless eyes. Maybe, I can use this guy Bucky to get rid of the Navy chasing after one after another like flies. After hesitating for a few seconds, Hawkeye made up his mind, spoke slowly, and said something that left Bucky dumbfounded. How about Bucky, do you want to form an alliance? 3 pillars round the island, the sun sets in the west, and the afterglow of the setting sun scatters on the east side of the dilapidated island sea town, reflecting the yellow sand all over the ground. On the west side of the relatively complete town, there should have been a street where vicious pirates who did not recognize their 6 relatives were walking, but at this time it was empty and quite desolate. Except for some residents who fled with their families, it is difficult to see people in sea island towns. Even the taverns and casinos that are open 24 hours a day are empty. Just an hour ago, the pirate queen Hancock and the core cadre of the Bucky pirates, Mr. 3, who suddenly came to the 3-pillar roundabout, issued a gauntlet to Crocodile, the biggest boss secretly in Island Sea. The 2 sides will start a decisive battle on Island Sea tomorrow morning. The ordinary pirates who were aware of the seriousness of the situation immediately left Island Sea without hesitation, and even left the 3-pillar roundabout as soon as they heard the news, for fear of being affected. Although there are also strong pirates who choose to stay here to watch the battle, the number is quite rare. At this time, the temporary stronghold of the Bucky Express mercenary group. Mr. 3 was lying on the luxurious single bed, his thoughts were flying, pondering the details of tomorrow morning's decisive battle and possible special situations. After finishing the tedious preparations for the battle, Mr. 3 couldn't help but think of Ayasha, who was in the conference room just now. After getting the signature of the candle, her eyes were shining brightly. Although he simply wrote a 3 on it, Ayasha's fruit ability is very useful to the unpredictable Bucky pirates after the recruitment. It's really a treasure. It's not just the old and new Shichibukai, The Bucky pirates need more powerhouses if they want to gain a foothold and even subvert the world. That is to say, her role will only get bigger and bigger. When it comes to the Bucky pirates, Mr. 3 suddenly thinks of an unreliable captain with a high luck value. Speaking of which, I don't know what happened to that guy Bucky. Mr. 3 suddenly appeared in front of Bucky's treacherous and wretched face, and he couldn't help but worry. Under normal circumstances, if Bucky didn't get too greedy, the success rate of the tricks he gave would definitely not be low. After all, that is the god of Bucky who doesn't have to be surprised at all no matter what he does. Ding. Just thinking about it, deep in Mr. 3's mind, a long-lost system notification sound suddenly came. Mr. 3 concentrates on checking, and several question marks suddenly appear in front of him. Former Shicibukai Edward Wable, White 2, as recruited, and the current target progress as completed. Because the recruiter is Captain Bucky and not the host himself, the target reward has been changed to a group gain. Target reward 10. The host's physical fitness, fruit ability development progress, and domineering training progress are increased by 5%, and the clown Bucky's physical fitness, fruit ability development progress, and domineering training progress are increased by. Core cadres. Hancock, Yalita, Kabaji, Mochi, niche physical fitness increased by 1%, fruit development progress increased by 1%, domineering training progress increased by 1%. Target evaluation. D. Although the strategy of creating something out of nothing is remarkable, but the executor Bucky the Clown is too greedy for money, deterring the recruitment completed with interests and strength, the actual meaning is too low. Open the third stage of the main objective. Open the branch goal, Wable's righteous extermination. Looking at the prompt on the system panel, the corner of Mr. 3's mouth couldn't help but twitch. Why is this guy Bucky so fast? How long did it take to complete Wable's recruitment? Moreover, it is simply incomprehensible why this toolman can get his reward. Also, what the heck is recruitment completed with deterrence of interests in strength? Bucky, a parallel importer, can still deter Wable with strength? Regarding the first two questions, Mr. 3 calmed down and thought about it, and he was relieved. After all, he is the soul of the clown Bucky pirates. Lucky and domineering can affect the existence of the great gods of the system. Although Bucky's small enhancement is a disadvantage just thinking about it, it is generally understandable. No matter how you say it, it is true that the captain's strength is too strong. Thinking of Bucky's inexplicably becomes so powerful, and the arrogant and smug look of laughing, Mr. 3's face suddenly flashed a vicious look. Dare to rub your third brother's experience, and look back to drop wax on your forehead. The hot kind. As for the third question, Mr. 3 has no clue for now. Anyway, he didn't believe that he was beaten to death. Bucky can suppress Wable in terms of strength. We can only wait until we meet to see what the situation is. Vaguely, Mr. 3 felt that Bucky's recruitment trip to Wable should bring him unexpected surprises. After clearing his thoughts, Mr. 3 moved his mind slightly and opened his information panel. The strongest Emperor subsystem, host, Mr. 3. Appearance. 72 physical fitness. A. Lucky value. E+S. The clown Bucky camp has its own buff, it will disappear when it leaves. Ability. Wax fruit. Accuracy 99%. Strength 86%. Characteristics 82%. Unawakened. Armed color domineering. Normal. Scene color domineering. Normal. Overlord color domineering. Mang Shin. Props. Former Admiral Aokiji Sea Bicycle. 1% progress in refining into a black car. Main line goal. Successfully recruit more than one Shicibukai to join the clown Bucky pirates, strengthen the force, and take the second in command position of the Bucky pirates. Goal reward, completed. Evaluation A. Target reward, completed. Evaluation D. Target reward 3. Fruit ability development capsule, different dimensional ability training manual, 3 color domineering, choose one of them to upgrade, teaching teacher to be determined. Sub-line goal. Hancock's transcendence, domineering and domineering completely surpass Hancock. Target reward. A book of advanced physical skills. Sub-line goal. Wable's righteous killing of relatives. Let Wable see the true face of Miss Bajan and carry him away. Target reward. The designated weapon has a weak shock effect. Apart from a small increase in attributes, the character information has not changed much. However, The fruit accuracy of 99% height made Mr. Three's eyes bright. I didn't expect that the accuracy attribute would be full before I knew it. And the strength and characteristics have been greatly improved, so that. Inspiration came suddenly. Mr. Three raised his hand and randomly created candle balls on his fingertips. His concentration was high, and like squeezing a bubble, he began to compress the candle ball in all directions. I saw ripples appearing on the surface of the candle ball, from the outside to the inside, and began to shrink a little in the center. When it is close to about 2/3 of the original volume, you can clearly feel the strong force inside the candle ball, which has increased dramatically. In the end, the candle ball burst with a pop because it couldn't bear the huge pressure. White splashed with a little sticky wax, splashing all over the big bed, and even Mr. Three's face got a lot of it. But Mr. Three didn't care about it, staring at his right hand holding the candle ball with burning eyes. This wave of fruit attributes has been strengthened. I didn't expect that I could already achieve this level of density and explosion. In other words, is that move possible? Mr. Three muttered to himself. The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. Finally, he stood up directly, and with his slightly recovered physical strength, he couldn't wait to try. Then, a boom sounded. His room exploded. Hancock and Ayasha, who were resting next door, were startled and got out of bed. Enemy attack.